I never believed in gut feelings until that October night on Highway 1. My name is Officer Jake Martinez, and I've been patrolling the Pacific Coast Highway with the California Highway Patrol for 8 years. The stretch between Malibu and Ventura County has seen its share of accidents, domestic calls, and the occasional drunk tourist who thinks driving these winding cliffs at midnight is a good idea. But what happened that Tuesday night still makes my hands shake when I think about it. The fog was rolling in thick from the Pacific when my shift started at 10 p.m. Highway 1 becomes a different beast at night, especially when the marine layer swallows the moonlight and turns everything beyond your headlights into gray nothing. The radio crackled with routine traffic stops and fender benders further south near Santa Monica, but my sector stayed quiet. Too quiet, as it turned out. Around 11:45, I was parked at the scenic overlook near Point Mugu, finishing paperwork from an earlier speeding citation. The ocean below was invisible in the darkness, just the sound of waves hitting rocks somewhere in the void. My patrol unit faced north toward Oxnard. Emergency lights off, engine idling. The heater fought against the damp chill seeping through the windows. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. 2 white beams appeared around the southern curve, moving fast. Too fast for these conditions. I reached for the radar gun, but before I could get a reading, the vehicle flew past. It was a dark sedan, maybe black or navy blue, windows tinted so dark they looked painted. No license plate visible in the brief moment it passed under the streetlight. I flipped on my emergency lights and pulled onto the highway. The sedan's taillights were already disappearing around the next bend. I radioed in the pursuit. Control, this is Unit 7 Adam 12, initiating traffic stop northbound Highway 1 near Point Mugu. Dark sedan, excessive speed, no visible plates. Copy 7 Adam 12, backup en route from Oxnard Station. The sedan wasn't slowing down. If anything, it seemed to be accelerating. These curves were posted at 35 miles per hour for good reason. The cliff face on the right and the 300-foot drop to the ocean on the left didn't forgive mistakes. But this driver seemed to know every twist and turn like they'd driven this route 1,000 times. I kept my distance, lights and siren going, but my speedometer was pushing 60 on stretches where I'd normally cruise at 40. The fog thickened as we climbed toward the hills, and I found myself leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. The sedan's taillights would disappear completely in the thickest patches, only to reappear like red eyes in the mist. 5 miles into the chase, something changed. The sedan's brake lights flashed once, twice, then it pulled over at a wide spot in the road near Neptune's Net. Just stopped. Engine still running, but perfectly still. I radioed our position and approached on foot, flashlight in my left hand, right hand resting on my service weapon. Standard procedure for a high-risk stop. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. The car was a late-model BMW sedan, pristine black paint that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. The windows were tinted beyond legal limits, dark enough that I couldn't see inside even with the light. Driver, turn off the engine and exit the vehicle with your hands visible. Nothing. The engine kept purring. I could hear the ocean far below, waves crashing against the rocks, but no sound from inside the car. I moved to the driver's side window and tapped with my flashlight. Driver, I need you to roll down the window. The window slid down with an electronic hum, but there was no one behind the wheel. The driver's seat was empty. So was the passenger seat. I aimed my flashlight into the back seat, also empty. The engine was running, the car was in park, but there was no driver. No one at all. My skin went cold, and not from the ocean breeze. I'd seen accidents where drivers were ejected, but this car showed no signs of damage. The doors were locked except for the driver's side, which I tried and found open. The interior smelled new, like leather and cleaning chemicals. No personal belongings, no registration visible in the sun visor, nothing to indicate who owned this ghost car. I called it in. Control, this is 7 Adam 12. We have a situation here. Vehicle is empty, no driver on scene. Requesting backup and a tow truck. Copy 7 Adam 12. Can you confirm no driver on scene? That's affirmative. Car was moving at high speed less than 5 minutes ago. Now it's empty. There was a pause. 7 Adam 12. Backup is 20 minutes out due to fog delays. Secure the scene and stand by. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. The fog was getting thicker, and the empty BMW sat there like a black hole in the mist. I walked a perimeter around the pullout area, searching for any sign of where the driver might have gone. The guardrail was intact, no footprints visible on the wet asphalt. No blood or clothing caught on the metal barriers. That's when I noticed the smell. It started subtle, mixing with the salt air and exhaust fumes. But as I walked back toward the BMW, it got stronger. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water, or meat starting to turn. I'd smelled it before at accident scenes, and it made my stomach clench. I opened the driver's door wider and leaned in, following my nose. The smell was definitely coming from inside the car. I popped the trunk release and walked to the back of the vehicle, hand on my weapon again. The trunk was empty too. Clean carpeting, spare tire in its well, emergency kit neatly organized in one corner. But the smell was stronger here, almost overwhelming. I had to step back and breathe through my mouth. My radio crackled. 7 Adam 12, this is Control. We're showing another high-speed vehicle heading north on your location. Dark sedan, no plates visible. I looked south down the highway. Through the fog, I could see headlights approaching fast. The same distinctive beam pattern, the same aggressive driving style. As it got closer, I could make out the shape, another BMW sedan, identical to the one sitting empty beside me. This one didn't slow down. It flew past the pullout at what had to be 70 miles per hour, heading north into the thickest part of the fog bank. I jumped back in my patrol unit and hit the lights. Control, in pursuit of second vehicle, northbound Highway 1. But this time was different. This time, I could barely keep the taillights in sight. The fog was so thick my headlights seemed to stop just a few feet in front of the bumper. I had to slow down to 40, then 30, then 25, just to stay on the road. The sedan's lights would appear and disappear like ghosts, always just at the edge of visibility. After about 3 miles, I lost them completely. I pulled over at the next turnout and sat there, engine running, trying to make sense of what was happening. 2 identical cars, both empty, both driven by invisible drivers through fog thick enough to choke on. My backup finally arrived. Officer Sarah Williams from Oxnard Station, her patrol unit appearing out of the fog like a ship coming into port. She pulled up next to me and rolled down her window. "Martinez, what's the situation?" I told her everything. The high-speed chase, the empty BMW, the smell in the trunk, the second identical vehicle. She listened without interrupting, but I could see the skepticism in her face. "Let's go back and look at the first car," she said. We drove back to where I'd left the empty BMW. The pullout was still there, the guardrail still intact, but the car was gone. No skid marks, no broken glass, no sign it had ever been there except for a faint outline in the thin layer of dust on the asphalt. Williams looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Martinez, you sure you didn't fall asleep? This fog can mess with your head." I was starting to wonder myself. But then my radio crackled again. "All units, we have multiple reports of a dark sedan driving erratically on northbound Highway 1. Last seen near Rincon Point. No plates, excessive speed. Williams and I looked at each other. Rincon Point was 15 miles north of where we stood. If someone was driving that fast in this fog, they'd either crash or... Control, 7 Adam 12 and 7 Adam 15 responding to Rincon Point. We drove north together, emergency lights cutting through the fog like red and blue knives. The marine layer was starting to lift slightly as we climbed away from the water, but visibility was still terrible. We had to follow the yellow center line like a lifeline. At Rincon Point, we found them. 3 BMW sedans, all identical, all dark, all empty. They were parked in perfect formation at the scenic overlook, engines running, headlights pointing out toward the invisible ocean. The smell was there too, stronger than before, sweet decay that made my eyes water. Williams got on the radio while I approached the first car. Control, we have 3 abandoned vehicles at Rincon Point, requesting backup and supervisors. I tried the door handles, all locked except for the driver's door of the middle vehicle. Inside, the smell was so strong I gagged. But there was something else. A piece of paper on the passenger seat. I pulled on gloves and picked it up. It was a printout from a medical examiner's office, dated 3 days earlier. The header read, Ventura County Coroner, Transport Manifest. Below that, a list of names and case numbers. At the bottom, a destination, Pacific View Memorial Park, Malibu section. My hands started shaking as I read the names. John Richardson, age 45, traffic fatality. Maria Santos, age 32, drowning victim. David Kim, age 28, drug overdose. 7 names total, all with death dates within the last week. Williams appeared at my shoulder. "What is it?" I showed her the paper. Her face went pale in the flashlight beam. "Martinez, Pacific View Memorial is back where we started, down near Point Mugu." We looked at the 3 empty cars, engines still running, headlights still burning through the fog. Then at each other. How do 3 dead people drive 3 cars 15 miles through fog like this? Williams whispered. I didn't have an answer, but as we stood there trying to process what we were seeing, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of car doors closing. All 3, one after another. Soft clicks in the mist. We spun around. The cars were still there, still empty as far as we could see through the tinted windows. But now all the engines were off. The sudden silence was deafening. Williams had her weapon drawn. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Nothing. Just the sound of waves on rocks somewhere far below and our own breathing. Then the engine started again. All 3 simultaneously. No one turned any keys, no one pressed any buttons. They just rumbled to life like they were answering some unheard command. "We need to get out of here," Williams said, backing toward our patrol units. But as we retreated, the BMW in the middle started moving. Slowly at first, backing out of its parking space with no one behind the wheel. The other 2 followed, forming a convoy that began to creep toward the highway. I grabbed my radio. "Control, 7 Adam 12. We need all available units at Rincon Point. We have 3 vehicles moving without drivers." Static answered me. Then a voice I didn't recognize, hollow and distant. "No units available. All units are busy with traffic fatalities." Williams and I exchanged looks. That wasn't the dispatcher's voice. That wasn't anyone from our station. The 3 BMWs had reached the highway now, turning south toward Malibu, moving slowly, deliberately, like a funeral procession. We followed at a distance, emergency lights dark, afraid to get too close but unable to turn away. They drove exactly at the speed limit. No erratic movements, no racing through curves, just steady, purposeful progress down Highway 1. Other drivers seemed to move out of their way without even realizing it, drifting into other lanes as if guided by instinct. As we descended back toward sea level, the fog began to clear. I could see the ocean again, black water stretching to the horizon. And I could see inside the BMWs more clearly now. They weren't empty anymore. Each car had a driver. Pale figures sitting perfectly straight, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheels, eyes fixed straight ahead. They were wearing what looked like their best clothes. A dark suit, a blue dress, a white shirt and tie. Funeral clothes. I tried to radio for backup again, but all I got was that same hollow voice. All units busy with traffic fatalities. The convoy turned off Highway 1 at the Pacific View Memorial Park exit. Williams and I followed them through the cemetery gates, past rows of headstones that looked like gray teeth in our headlights. The BMWs stopped at a section where several fresh graves were marked with temporary placards instead of permanent stones. The engines cut off again. The pale drivers sat motionless for a long moment, then began to fade like morning mist. One by one, they became transparent, then vanished entirely, leaving the cars empty again. But we could hear them now. Voices carried on the ocean breeze, 7 people talking quietly among themselves, thanking someone for the ride home, saying they could rest now, saying goodbye. Williams was crying. I realized I was too. The voices faded. The smell of flowers and decay lifted. The 3 BMWs sat silent in the cemetery, just abandoned cars now. Nothing more supernatural than metal and glass and faded registration tags. My radio crackled back to life with the familiar voice of our dispatcher. 7 Adam 12, what's your status? I looked at Williams. She nodded. Control, 7 Adam 12. We have 3 abandoned vehicles at Pacific View Memorial. Requesting tow trucks and an investigation team. Copy, 7 Adam 12. Units are en route. We waited by our patrol cars until backup arrived. 3 tow trucks hauled away the empty BMWs. The investigation team found nothing unusual. Just 3 stolen vehicles that had been missing from various locations around Los Angeles County. No fingerprints, no DNA, no indication of who had been driving them. The coroner's manifest I'd found was real. Those 7 people had died within the past week, all transported to Pacific View Memorial for burial. But their graves had been empty when the groundskeepers opened them the next morning. The bodies were missing. They found them 3 days later, all 7, lying peacefully in their assigned plots. The graves hadn't been disturbed. The caskets were still sealed, but somehow the bodies had found their way home. The official report listed the BMW incidents as vehicle thefts with unknown perpetrators. The missing bodies were explained as a clerical error. They'd been in the right graves all along. The groundskeepers had just looked in the wrong section. But I know what I saw. And Williams knows too, though we don't talk about it much. 7 people who needed one last ride. One final journey down Highway 1 to their eternal rest. Maybe they couldn't find peace until they'd made that trip. Until they'd felt the ocean breeze and heard the waves one more time. I still patrol that stretch of highway. Still work the night shift when the fog rolls in thick and cold from the Pacific. Sometimes I see cars driving a little too carefully, a little too purposefully through the mist. Sometimes I catch the scent of flowers on the wind, mixed with salt air and exhaust. I don't chase them anymore. Some journeys are meant to be taken alone, and some passengers have destinations that the living can't follow. Highway 1 has always been a road between worlds, between land and sea, between the civilized coast and the wild Pacific, between the quick and the dead. On foggy nights when visibility drops to 0 and the world shrinks to just the yellow lines under my headlights, I remember those 7 voices saying goodbye. I remember the peace in their tone when they knew they'd made it home. And I'd drive a little slower, a little more carefully, making sure the road stays clear for anyone who might need it. Because everyone deserves a safe journey home, no matter how long they've been traveling. And on Highway 1, sometimes the longest journeys are the ones that matter most. The weeks that followed that October night changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those pale figures behind the wheels of those BMWs, driving through fog so thick it seemed solid. Williams took early retirement 2 months later, said she needed to find a job where the impossible stayed impossible. I understood. Not everyone is cut out for the kind of policing where you have to accept that some questions don't have answers. But I stayed. Someone had to work the night shift on Highway 1, and after what I'd seen, I felt like I was the right person for the job. Or maybe the job had chosen me. Either way, I found myself volunteering for extra shifts, taking calls that other officers mysteriously couldn't handle, becoming the unofficial guardian of the most haunted stretch of highway in California. The first sign that my experience wasn't over came 3 weeks later. I was patrolling the same stretch near Point Mugu, fog rolling in thick from the Pacific, when I got a call about an abandoned motorcycle on the shoulder. Single rider, bike found running but empty, helmet still hanging from the handlebars. I found the motorcycle right where dispatch said it would be, a Harley-Davidson Sportster, cherry red with enough chrome to blind a pilot, but no rider anywhere in sight. The engine was still warm, keys in the ignition, a half-finished energy drink in the cup holder, like someone had just vanished mid-ride. I called it in, started the standard procedure for an abandoned vehicle. But as I walked around the bike, looking for any sign of where the rider might have gone, I caught that smell again. Sweet flowers mixed with something organic and unpleasant. The same smell that had filled those empty BMWs. The fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet in any direction. I should have waited for backup, should have secured the scene and let the day shift handle it, but something about that motorcycle kept drawing my attention. The license plate was too new, too clean. The registration sticker was dated yesterday. I ran the plates through dispatch. The bike was registered to Marcus Webb, age 28, address in Thousand Oaks. No outstanding warrants, clean driving record, no history of mental illness or risky behavior. Just a normal guy who'd bought a motorcycle and apparently vanished while riding it. That's when I heard the sound. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, a humming that seemed to come from the asphalt itself, like the road was trying to communicate. I'd never heard anything like it before, but somehow it felt familiar, like a song I'd known in childhood but forgotten until this moment. The humming got louder, and I realized it was moving, coming from the south, traveling up Highway 1 at roughly the speed of traffic. But there were no headlights visible through the fog, no engine noise, just that strange harmonic vibration that made my teeth ache. I drew my weapon and stepped behind my patrol unit, using the engine block for cover. The sound was getting closer, and with it came a pressure change that made my ears pop, like being underwater or at high altitude. Then I saw it. A single headlight emerged from the fog, but it wasn't attached to any vehicle I could see. Just a bright white beam floating about 4 feet off the ground, moving at steady highway speed. As it got closer, I could make out the faint outline of a motorcycle beneath it. Not solid, but translucent, like heat shimmer on summer asphalt. The ghost bike slowed as it approached the abandoned Harley. The humming sound intensified, and I watched in fascination as a figure materialized on the phantom motorcycle. Young man in leather jacket and jeans, dark hair whipping in the wind created by his own passage. He looked exactly like the photo on Marcus Webb's driver's license. The ghostwriter pulled up beside his abandoned bike and sat there for a moment, engine idling silently. He reached out with one translucent hand to touch the fuel tank, fingers passing through the metal like it was made of water. His mouth moved like he was saying something, but no sound reached me through the fog. Then he looked directly at me. Even through the mist and across 30 yards of highway, I felt the weight of his gaze. His eyes were sad, infinitely sad, like someone who'd lost everything that mattered and was just now realizing it. He raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a salute, then twisted his ghostly throttle. The phantom motorcycle accelerated into the fog, that strange humming sound dopplering away into the distance. Within seconds, both rider and bike had vanished completely, leaving only the abandoned Harley and the smell of flowers in the salt air. I holstered my weapon and walked over to the motorcycle. It was different now, not physically, but energetically. The machine felt empty in a way it hadn't before, like whatever had connected it to its owner had been severed. Just metal and rubber and gasoline, nothing more. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, followed by a detective from Ventura County who took my statement with professional skepticism. They'd investigate, try to find Marcus Webb, probably discover he'd died in an accident somewhere else, and the bike had been abandoned by whoever found it first. Another unexplained case that would be filed away and forgotten. But I knew better. Marcus Webb had been riding Highway 1 when something happened. An accident, maybe, or a medical emergency. And his spirit had been trapped, forced to ride the same route over and over until he could find his way to whatever came next. The abandoned motorcycle had been an anchor, keeping him tethered to the physical world. Now he was free. This became my new normal over the following months. Abandoned vehicles appearing on Highway 1, always during the thickest fog, always carrying the scent of flowers and decay. Cars, trucks, motorcycles, even a recreational vehicle that took 3 tow trucks to haul away. Each one empty but warm, keys in the ignition. Personal belongings scattered around like the owner had simply evaporated. And each time, if I was patient and observant, I'd catch a glimpse of the real driver. Ghost figures completing their final journeys, saying goodbye to the machines that had carried them in life. Sometimes they'd acknowledge me, sometimes they'd ignore me completely, but they all had that same look of infinite sadness mixed with profound relief. They were going home. The department started assigning me to these calls automatically. Other officers found excuses to avoid the fog-shrouded stretches of Highway 1, leaving me to handle the routine, abandoned vehicle reports. I didn't mind. Someone had to be there when the lost souls needed safe passage, and I was starting to understand that this was my calling. Captain Morrison called me into his office again after the 6th such incident. "Martinez, you're developing quite a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that makes other officers nervous. The kind that gets you transferred to desk duty if you're not careful." I waited for him to continue. "But also, the kind that gets results. Your clearance rate on missing persons cases is phenomenal. Abandoned vehicle reports in your sector get resolved faster than anywhere else in the county, and I haven't had a single complaint about your performance or professionalism." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. I'm assigning you to a special detail, liaising with other agencies on unexplained disappearances along coastal highways. Officially, you'll be investigating patterns in vehicle abandonment and possible human trafficking routes. Unofficially, ... He trailed off, studying my face. "Unofficially, you'll be doing what you're already doing, just with more resources and less paperwork." The special assignment opened doors I didn't know existed. Missing persons files from the past decade, all involving people who'd vanished while driving coastal routes. Not just Highway 1, but the entire California coastline from San Diego to Crescent City. Hundreds of cases where people had simply disappeared, leaving their vehicles behind like empty shells. I started mapping the incidents, looking for patterns. What I found was both fascinating and terrifying. The disappearances clustered around specific locations, scenic overlooks, memorial sites, places where the highway curved close to the ocean, and they increased dramatically during certain weather conditions. Fog, obviously, but also during winter storms and unusually high tides. More importantly, I started finding connections between the missing people. Not obvious ones, but subtle threads that linked their stories together. A disproportionate number of them had lost someone close recently. Parents, spouses, children. Many were traveling alone, often late at night, often with no clear destination in mind. They were all carrying grief. That realization changed everything. These weren't random disappearances or accidents. They were journeys of sorrow. People so overwhelmed by loss that they'd somehow stepped outside the normal boundaries of life and death. Highway 1 was serving as a conduit for their pain, a route that led from the world of the living to whatever lay beyond. I started approaching the abandoned vehicle calls differently. Instead of just securing the scene and waiting for tow trucks, I began treating each location as a kind of shrine. I'd stand quietly in the fog, listening for voices or footsteps, watching for movement at the edge of visibility. More often than not, I'd catch glimpses of the ghost drivers completing their final miles. Sometimes I could help them. The breakthrough came on a December night near Pismo Beach. Heavy fog had rolled in around midnight, thick enough to shut down most of Highway 101. But I was patrolling Highway 1, as usual, when the call came in about an abandoned pickup truck. I found it parked at a scenic overlook, engine running, driver's door hanging open. A Ford F-150, maybe 10 years old, with a child's car seat in the back and toys scattered across the floor. The registration belonged to David Santos, age 34, divorced, living in Santa Maria. But this time was different. This time, I could see the ghost driver before his vehicle had fully materialized. He was sitting on a bench at the overlook, transparent figure staring out at the invisible ocean. Young man in work clothes, holding something in his hands that looked like a small toy. Even from a distance, I could see the tears on his face. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. Ghosts could be unpredictable, especially fresh ones who hadn't accepted their situation yet. "David?" He looked up at me, surprised. Most spirits couldn't hear the living, but sometimes grief made them more perceptible to both worlds. Can you see me?" "I can see you," I said, sitting down on the bench beside him. "You're David Santos, right? From Santa Maria?" He nodded, looking down at the toy in his hands. It was a small stuffed elephant, purple with pink ears. "This was Emma's, my daughter. There was an accident. Drunk driver, ran a red light." The pain in his voice was so raw it made my chest ache. I'd read about this case, 5-year-old Emma Santos, killed by a repeat DUI offender who walked away from the collision without a scratch. David had been fighting for custody when it happened, trying to protect his daughter from an unstable ex-wife. Now, there was nothing left to protect. "I was driving to see her," he continued. "Every night for 3 weeks I get in the truck and drive south. But I never make it past this spot. Every time I try to keep going, I end up here instead." "Because this isn't about reaching her," I said gently. "This is about letting go." He looked at me with eyes full of desperate hope. "Can you help me? I just want to see Emma one more time." Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't save her. I thought about all the other ghost drivers I'd encountered, all the souls trapped between worlds by unresolved grief. Maybe my role wasn't just to witness their passages, but to help them find peace. David, where do you think Emma is now? I don't know. Heaven, maybe, if there is such a place. And where do you think you need to be? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the stuffed elephant. With her? But I don't know how to get there from here. Maybe you don't need to go anywhere. Maybe you just need to stop trying so hard to stay. The fog began to swirl around us, and I felt that familiar pressure change that meant something supernatural was happening. But this time it felt different, warmer, more welcoming, like a door opening instead of closing. David looked up from the toy, and his translucent face filled with wonder. "Do you hear that?" I listened, straining to catch whatever he was hearing through the fog and wind. And then I heard it too, the sound of a child laughing, happy, carefree laughter coming from somewhere just beyond the edge of perception. "Emma," David whispered. The laughter came again, closer this time, and with it a small voice calling out, "Daddy! Daddy, come play with me." David stood up from the bench, the stuffed elephant clutched to his chest. The sadness was leaving his face, replaced by joy so pure it made the fog around us glow with soft light. "She's here," he breathed. "She's really here." "She's been waiting for you," I said. "She just needed you to stop running long enough to find her." He turned to me one last time. "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me understand. Thank you for trusting me." David Santos smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from any of the ghost drivers. Then he walked into the fog, following his daughter's voice, and both of them faded into whatever comes after this life. His abandoned truck sat in the parking lot until morning, when the tow truck hauled it away. Another case closed, another soul at peace. But for me, it was the beginning of a new understanding of what I was meant to do on these fog-shrouded nights. I wasn't just a police officer anymore. I was a bridge between worlds, helping the grief-stricken dead find their way to the peace they couldn't reach alone. And Highway 1 was my cathedral, the sacred space where that work could be done. Word spread somehow, through whatever networks the dead used to communicate with each other. More ghost drivers began appearing on my shifts, not just random souls trapped by circumstance, but spirits who'd heard that help was available on the midnight watch. They came from all over California, drawn to Highway 1 like pilgrims to a holy site. Each one had a story. Margaret Chen, an elderly woman who'd been driving to visit her husband's grave every night for 6 months after his funeral, unable to accept that he was gone. I helped her understand that love doesn't require physical proximity, that her husband was with her whether she visited the cemetery or not. James Rodriguez, a young father who died in a motorcycle accident while racing to the hospital where his premature son was fighting for life. He'd been trying to reach the hospital's NICU for 3 years, his ghost bike appearing and disappearing on the same stretch of a highway where he'd crashed. I helped him realize that his son had grown strong and healthy, that his desperate ride was no longer necessary. Sarah Williams, a teenager who'd overdosed at a beach party and spent 2 years trying to drive home to apologize to her parents. She finally found peace when I explained that forgiveness doesn't always require words, that love can transcend even the most painful mistakes. Each successful crossing made me more confident in my unusual role, but it also brought new challenges. Not every spirit was ready for peace. Some were angry, violent, trapped by rage instead of grief. These encounters tested my limits and taught me that not all hauntings could be resolved with kind words and patient listening. The worst was Tommy Morrison. a gang member who'd been shot during a drug deal gone bad in Long Beach. His ghost had been terrorizing drivers on Highway 1 for months, appearing suddenly in their back seats or standing in the middle of the road, forcing cars off the cliff. 3 accidents, 2 fatalities, and a growing sense that something malevolent was using the highway for its own purposes. I encountered Tommy on a February night near Big Sur. His spirit was different from the others. Darker, more solid, radiating anger like heat from a fire. When I tried to communicate with him, he responded with threats and obscenities, making it clear that he had no interest in moving on to whatever came next. "I like it here," he snarled, his ghostly form flickering between human and something more monstrous. "I like scaring people. I like making them crash. Makes me feel powerful again." "Tommy, this isn't helping you," I tried to reason with him. "You're hurting innocent people." "So? They hurt me first. World hurt me first. Now it's my turn. Some souls, I learned, choose darkness over light, choose revenge over peace. And sometimes the only way to protect the living is to find ways to send those souls somewhere they can't cause harm. The final confrontation with Tommy Morrison happened during a winter storm, when Highway 1 was officially closed to civilian traffic. I'd been patrolling alone, watching for his manifestations, when he appeared directly in front of my patrol car, solid enough to make me slam on the brakes. "You've been looking for me," he said, walking through my windshield like it was made of water. "Now you found me." I'd prepared for this encounter, carrying blessed salt and holy water along with my standard equipment. But spiritual warfare is different from physical combat. You can't just shoot a ghost or wrestle him to the ground. You have to be stronger than his anger, more determined than his hatred. "Tommy, you don't belong here anymore. It's time to move on. I belong wherever I want to belong. And I want to belong here, making your life miserable." He reached for me with hands that felt like ice water, trying to possess my body the way he'd possessed other drivers. But I'd been prepared for that too. I'd spent hours in meditation and prayer, building walls around my mind that hostile spirits couldn't breach. The battle lasted all night. Tommy throwing the full weight of his fury against my defenses, me standing firm and refusing to let him pass. By dawn, he was weakening, his form becoming less solid, his voice losing its power to intimidate. "This isn't over," he whispered as the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds. "I'll be back." But he wasn't. Hostile spirits draw their power from darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Confronted with someone who refused to be intimidated, who stood in the light and offered peace instead of violence, Tommy Morrison's ghost finally released its grip on the physical world and moved on to whatever judgment awaited it. That encounter taught me that my role as a spiritual guardian had aspects I hadn't expected. Sometimes helping the dead meant offering comfort and guidance. Sometimes it meant standing as a barrier between the worlds, protecting the living from souls who'd chosen malevolence over peace. 5 years into my supernatural police work, I was approached by Detective Sarah Kim from LAPD's Cold Case Unit. She'd been investigating a series of missing persons cases along the entire California coast, and had noticed the same patterns I'd identified. People disappearing from their vehicles during specific weather conditions, always near locations with significant emotional resonance. "Officer Martinez, I need your expertise on something," she said during our first meeting at a coffee shop in Malibu. "I've read your reports on abandoned vehicle incidents, and I think you might be the only law enforcement officer in the state who understands what we're really dealing with." She laid out photos of missing persons across the table. Dozens of faces, all ages and backgrounds, but all with the same expression of profound sadness. People carrying burdens too heavy for the living world to sustain. They're not really missing, are they? She asked. No, I said. They're transitioning, moving from this world to whatever comes next. The vehicles get left behind because they don't need them anymore. Can you help me find them? Their families need closure. That was the beginning of a partnership that expanded my work beyond Highway 1. Detective Kim and I began investigating supernatural disappearances throughout California, developing protocols for distinguishing between conventional kidnappings and spiritual transitions. We couldn't tell the families the truth, that their loved ones had died and moved on, but we could help provide the closure they needed. Our success rate was phenomenal, partly because we understood what we were really investigating, but mostly because the ghost drivers wanted to be found. They'd leave signs, clues, messages that only someone familiar with spiritual communication could interpret. A father would leave his wedding ring on the dashboard of his abandoned car, positioned to catch the morning light in a way that spelled out, "I love you," in shadow. A mother would arrange her daughter's toys in patterns that revealed where her spirit had finally found peace. The work was emotionally exhausting, but deeply rewarding. Every case we closed meant a family could begin healing, and a soul could complete its journey without interference from the bureaucratic machinery of missing persons investigations. But it was also dangerous in ways I hadn't anticipated. Other entities had taken notice of the spiritual highway I was helping to maintain along the California coast. Not human souls, but older things that fed on grief and despair. They began infiltrating the crossing points, disguising themselves as lost spirits in need of guidance, then revealing their true nature once they'd gained access to the physical world. The first incident happened near Hearst Castle, where a woman claiming to be a ghost driver asked for my help reaching her deceased child. Something about her felt wrong. Too solid, too aware, too hungry. When I began questioning her more closely, her human disguise began to slip, revealing something predatory underneath. "You've been opening doors," the creature hissed, its form shifting between human and something reptilian, making it easy for us to cross over. "We should thank you." I barely escaped that encounter, but it taught me that spiritual work attracts attention from more than just human souls. There are other inhabitants of the spaces between worlds, and not all of them have good intentions toward the living. This led to connections with other people doing similar work. Father Miguel Santos, a Catholic priest who specialized in exorcisms and spiritual cleansing. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychologist who studied near-death experiences and helped people process supernatural encounters. Robert Thompson, a former Marine who'd started investigating paranormal incidents after his own ghostly encounters during military service. Together, we formed an unofficial network of spiritual first responders, people who understood that sometimes police work extended beyond the physical world. We shared information, resources, and backup for the cases that ordinary law enforcement couldn't handle. The most challenging case came in my 7th year on the supernatural beat, a mass casualty event where 15 people had died in a chain reaction accident on Highway 1 during a particularly dense fog. Instead of moving on normally, all 15 spirits became trapped at the crash site, reliving their final moments over and over again. The location became a supernatural hazard, with the ghost drivers causing additional accidents as living motorists swerved to avoid the phantom vehicles. We had to close that stretch of highway while our team worked to help the trapped spirits find peace. It took 3 weeks. Each spirit had to be approached individually, their specific fears and regrets addressed before they could let go of the crash site. Some needed to send messages to family members. Others needed assurance that their deaths weren't their fault. A few needed help understanding that they were actually dead, that the endless repetition of the crash was keeping them from whatever came next. Father Santos provided spiritual counseling. Dr. Walsh helped with psychological intervention. Robert Thompson coordinated with Highway Patrol to maintain the road closure and explain the situation to frustrated motorists in terms they could accept. I served as the primary communicator, the bridge between the living and dead teams. Every day for 3 weeks, I stood at the crash site and talked to 15 confused, terrified souls, helping them understand their situation and find the courage to move forward. The breakthrough came when we realized the spirits weren't just trapped by their own fear, they were being held by their concern for each other. They'd formed a community in death, unwilling to abandon any member of their group. It wasn't until we helped them understand that they could travel together, that crossing over could be a group journey instead of a solo endeavor, that they finally found peace. All 15 spirits departed at sunset on the 21st day, holding hands as they walked into a light that seemed to emanate from the ocean itself. The crash site immediately felt different, cleaner, safer, free of the psychic residue that had been accumulating there. Highway 1 reopened the next morning with no explanation beyond maintenance complete. That case established protocols that we still use today for complex supernatural incidents. Sometimes individual intervention isn't enough. Sometimes entire communities of spirits need help transitioning together. The work requires patience, understanding, and a willingness to think beyond conventional solutions. My reputation in the supernatural law enforcement community grew. I started getting consultation requests from agencies across the country, helping other officers understand and respond to paranormal incidents. The training I provided was always unofficial, couched in terms of psychology and crisis intervention, but the people who needed it knew what we were really talking about. But the biggest challenge was yet to come. The supernatural highway patrol work opened doors I never expected to walk through. 3 months after the mass casualty incident near Hearst Castle, I received a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, no relation despite sharing my last name, wanted to discuss what she called anomalous transportation phenomena along the West Coast. We met at a diner in Pismo Beach, one of those 24-hour places where truckers and night shift workers gather to drink coffee that could strip paint and eat pie that tastes like childhood memories. Agent Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made you careful about every word you spoke. "Sergeant Martinez," she began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "I've been reviewing your incident reports for the past 5 years. Interesting reading." The folder contained copies of every supernatural case I'd worked, along with similar reports from Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Hundreds of incidents involving abandoned vehicles, missing persons, and unexplained accidents along coastal highways from Mexico to the Arctic Circle. "We think there's a pattern here," Agent Martinez continued. "Something bigger than individual hauntings or isolated paranormal events. We're calling it the Pacific Coast Phenomenon, and we'd like your help understanding it." I flipped through the reports, recognizing the familiar elements: fog-bound highways, grief-stricken drivers, vehicles found empty but still running. But the scale was staggering. What I'd thought was a localized California issue was apparently happening along thousands of miles of coastline. "What do you think is causing it?" "That's what we're trying to determine. Could be geological, something about the tectonic activity along the Pacific Rim creating weak spots between dimensions. Could be psychological, the coastal highways attracting people in crisis, creating a feedback loop of spiritual energy. Or it could be something else entirely." She pulled out another file, this one marked with classification stamps I'd never seen before. "Sergeant, I'm going to share something with you that's not in any official database. 3 years ago, we started tracking a specific type of missing person case. people who disappear from vehicles along coastal routes, but whose bodies are later found in locations hundreds or thousands of miles away. Always peaceful, always appearing to have died of natural causes, always discovered in places that had special meaning to them in life. The implications hit me immediately. They're completing journeys that started in the spirit world. That's our working theory. Somehow, these coastal highways are serving as launching points for souls to travel vast distances instantaneously. We've had bodies turn up in childhood homes across the country, in foreign countries where the deceased had never traveled while alive, even in locations that only existed in their memories or dreams. This was bigger than anything I'd imagined. Not just local ghosts finding peace, but the entire supernatural transportation network spanning continents. What do you need from me? We're assembling a task force. People with field experience in paranormal law enforcement. You'd be our West Coast coordinator working with similar specialists up and down the coastline. Full federal authority, unlimited resources, and access to information that's been classified since the 1940s. The 1940s. That caught my attention. How long has the government known about this? Agent Martinez smiled grimly. Sergeant, the U.S. military has been documenting supernatural phenomena since World War II. We just haven't known what to do about it until recently. She opened the classified file, revealing photographs and documents that made my head spin. Military reports of ghost soldiers appearing at battlefield memorial sites. Navy accounts of phantom ships sailing alongside living vessels. Air Force documentation of unidentified aerial phenomena that defied all known laws of physics. The pattern became clear about a decade ago, she continued. These aren't random hauntings or isolated incidents. They're part of a global network of spiritual pathways, with major nodes at locations of intense emotional significance. The Pacific Coast highways are just one segment of a much larger system. I thought about all the ghost drivers I'd helped over the years, all the souls who'd found peace through the mysterious roads that ran along California's coastline. Had I been serving as a small-time operator in a vast, invisible transportation company? If this is real, if there's actually a global network of supernatural highways, why hasn't it been public knowledge? Because knowledge changes things. The more people know about these pathways, the more they use them. And not everyone who uses them has good intentions. She showed me another file, this one containing incident reports that made my experience with Tommy Morrison look like a minor disturbance. Malevolent entities using spiritual highways to spread across the globe. Hostile ghosts coordinating attacks on living populations. Ancient things that had been sleeping for centuries suddenly awakening and traveling along the network to places where they could cause maximum harm. The network is destabilizing, Agent Martinez explained. Too much traffic, too many crossings, too many doors being opened without proper safeguards. We need people who understand how it works to help us regulate it before something catastrophic happens. The job offer was tempting, but it also meant leaving behind the work I'd been doing along Highway 1, all the individual souls who still needed help, all the local crossings that required monitoring and maintenance. I need to think about it. Of course. But don't take too long. We've detected increased activity along your section of the coast. Something big is building, and we think you might be the key to understanding what it is. She left me with the files and her contact information, along with a warning that changed everything I thought I knew about my supernatural police work. Sergeant, you've been assuming that the ghost drivers you help are just random souls seeking peace. But what if they're not random? What if they're being sent to you specifically by someone or something that's been watching your work and evaluating your capabilities? That possibility kept me awake for weeks. Every ghost encounter I'd ever had re-examined through the lens of potential manipulation. Had I been helping lost souls find peace, or had I been unknowingly serving as a recruitment tool for some larger supernatural agenda? The answer came during my next encounter with a ghost driver, 2 weeks after my meeting with Agent Martinez. Another abandoned vehicle on Highway 1. Another translucent figure in need of guidance. But this time, I asked different questions. The spirit claimed to be Janet Morrison, a middle-aged woman who died in a car accident while driving to see her estranged daughter. She wanted help crossing over so she could apologize for years of family conflict and find peace in death. Standard case, familiar pattern. But when I pressed for details about her life and death, her story began to fall apart. She couldn't remember her daughter's name or the location of the accident. She had no knowledge of her own funeral or burial. And most tellingly, she showed no reaction to blessed salt or holy water, protections that affected genuine human spirits but had no impact on other types of entities. "You're not Janet Morrison," I said, drawing my service weapon even though bullets wouldn't harm whatever this thing really was. "What are you, and what do you want?" The false spirit's appearance began to shift, human features melting away to reveal something far older and more alien. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made my bones ache. "We have been watching your work, Bridge Builder. You show promise as a guide between worlds. There are those who would benefit from your services, souls who have been waiting centuries for someone with your flexibility regarding the boundaries between life and death." "What kind of souls?" "Ancient ones, powerful ones. Beings who ruled this land long before your species learned to make fire. They have been sleeping, but they wish to wake. They need a guide who can open the proper doors." This was exactly what Agent Martinez had warned me about. Ancient entities using the spiritual highway network to return to the physical world, with human guides serving as unknowing accomplices in their resurrection. "I won't help you." The creature's form continued to shift, becoming more monstrous with each passing second. "You will help us, willingly or otherwise. Your work has already begun opening the pathways we need. Soon, the old rulers will walk again, and this land will return to its proper masters." It lunged at me, not physically but psychically, trying to invade my mind the way Tommy Morrison had attempted years earlier. But my experience with hostile spirits had taught me how to defend against such attacks. I held firm, using meditation techniques and spiritual protections to maintain my mental barriers. The battle lasted until dawn, when the creature finally retreated, dissolving into mist that smelled of sulfur and decay. But its parting words echoed in my mind for days afterward. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The ancient compact is breaking, and the sleeping kings will rise. Your highway will serve as their road to conquest, whether you cooperate or not." I called Agent Martinez immediately. "The answer is yes," I told her. "I'll join your task force, but we need to move fast. Something is using the Pacific Coast Highway Network to wake things that should stay asleep." The Federal Task Force was unlike anything in my previous experience. Our team included military officers with experience in psychological warfare, scientists who studied consciousness and quantum mechanics, religious experts from a dozen different traditions, and law enforcement officers from around the world who'd encountered similar phenomena in their jurisdictions. Our base of operations was a converted Coast Guard station near Monterey, officially designated as a maritime safety research facility, but actually serving as headquarters for supernatural highway patrol activities along the entire West Coast. The facility included holding cells designed to contain spiritual entities, laboratories for studying paranormal evidence, and communication equipment that could monitor ghostly activity across thousands of miles of coastline. My first assignment was mapping the complete network of spiritual pathways along the California coast. Not just the major routes like Highway 1, but every back road, hiking trail, and hidden passage that spirits used for transportation. The work required months of field investigation, traveling to remote locations and testing for psychic residue, electromagnetic anomalies, and other signs of supernatural activity. What we discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The spiritual highway network was far more extensive than anyone had realized, with primary routes connecting major emotional landmarks, battlefields, disaster sites, places where large numbers of people had died violently or tragically. But there were also countless smaller pathways, some as narrow as footpaths, that connected individual homes to cemeteries, hospitals to morgues, crime scenes to courthouses. The entire system formed a web of spiritual infrastructure that paralleled the physical highway network, allowing souls to travel between emotionally significant locations without regard for physical distance or geographical barriers. A ghost could step onto the network at the site of a traffic accident in San Diego and emerge at a family burial plot in Maine, covering 3,000 miles in the blink of an eye. But the network was designed for individual travelers, not mass migration. The increased traffic we'd been documenting was causing structural damage to the pathways themselves, creating weak points where hostile entities could break through from other dimensions. It's like a highway system built for cars suddenly having to handle truck traffic, Dr. Sarah Walsh explained during one of our briefings. She'd joined the task force after her work with near-death experience research revealed connections to the spiritual transportation network. The infrastructure can't handle the load, so it's starting to collapse. The collapse wasn't random. Our investigations revealed that someone, or something, was deliberately overloading specific sections of the network, weakening the barriers between dimensions in strategic locations. Ancient entities were using the chaos to slip through cracks in reality, manifesting in the physical world for the first time in millennia. The first confirmed breakthrough happened near Big Sur, at a scenic overlook that had been the site of numerous ghost sightings over the years. Local park rangers reported that the area had developed an unnatural chill, even during hot summer days, and visitors complained of feeling watched by invisible presences. Our team investigated and found evidence of a major dimensional rupture. Something massive had used the spiritual highway network to cross over from whatever realm it had been inhabiting, leaving behind psychic residue that made the air itself feel hostile to human life. We tried to track the entity, but it had vanished into the California wilderness, leaving only footprints that looked like they'd been made by something with too many joints in its legs and claws where humans had toes. This is just the beginning, Agent Martinez warned during our emergency briefing. Our monitoring stations are detecting similar breakthrough attempts all along the coast. Whatever's organizing this knows our highway network better than we do. The realization that we were facing organized opposition changed everything about our mission. We weren't just maintaining spiritual infrastructure anymore. We were fighting a war against entities that wanted to reclaim dominance over the physical world. Our enemy revealed itself 3 weeks later. I was patrolling a section of Highway 1 near Carmel when every piece of electronic equipment in my patrol unit suddenly died. Radio, GPS, engine management system. Everything shut down simultaneously, leaving me stranded on a dark road with nothing but a flashlight and my service weapon. The fog rolled in within minutes, thick enough to reduce visibility to arm's length. But this wasn't natural marine layer. This was something alive and purposeful, moving against the wind and carrying sounds that had no earthly source. I got out of the disabled patrol car and waited, knowing that whatever had caused this wasn't finished with me yet. The voice came from everywhere at once, speaking English with an accent that belonged to no human culture. Bridge builder, guardian of the between paths, you have interfered with our awakening for the last time. Who are you? We are the first inhabitants of this land. We ruled here when your ancestors were learning to chip flint and make fire. We were cast into the sleeping realm by later interlopers, but now the pathways are open again, and we return to reclaim what was always ours. The fog began to take shape around me, forming into humanoid figures that stood 12 feet tall and moved with predatory grace. They had the basic structure of humans, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, but everything was wrong. Joints bent in impossible directions, fingers ended in claws that could shred steel, and their faces were arrangements of features that had never been designed for human comfort. The compact that bound us weakens, the lead figure continued. Your people's grief and rage feed the pathways, making them strong enough to carry us back to the waking world. Soon we will walk openly again, and your species will remember its proper place in the natural order. What compact? The agreement made by your spiritual leaders and ours, long ago when the world was younger. Your kind would have dominion over the physical realm, and we would rule the spaces between. But the pathways you have opened blur the boundaries. The compact no longer holds. I was beginning to understand. The spiritual highway network hadn't developed naturally. It was the result of some ancient agreement between humanity and older inhabitants of the earth. By helping souls travel between worlds, we'd unknowingly violated the terms of that agreement, giving these ancient entities legal justification, by whatever laws governed such things, to reclaim their former territories. What do you want from me? Join us willingly, and your species may survive as servants rather than prey. Continue to oppose us, and we will use your own highways to spread across this continent like wildfire. I thought about Agent Martinez's warnings, about all the ghost drivers I'd helped over the years, about the possibility that my work had contributed to this crisis. But I also thought about David Santos finding peace with his daughter, about the mass casualty victims who'd finally moved on together, about every soul I'd helped find their way home. I won't help you, I said. The ancient entity's response was swift and brutal. Psychic pressure slammed into my mind like a physical blow, trying to crush my consciousness and hollow out my skull for its own use. But years of spiritual combat had taught me to defend against such attacks, and the protective techniques I'd learned from Father Santos and the other task force members held firm. You cannot resist us forever, bridge builder. We have all the time in existence, and you are merely human. Maybe, but I'm not alone. At that moment, backup arrived in the form of 3 military helicopters equipped with experimental weaponry designed specifically for fighting supernatural entities. The aircraft appeared overhead without warning, searchlights cutting through the unnatural fog like swords of fire. The ancient entities reacted with surprise and rage, their forms dissolving back into mist as concentrated beams of electromagnetic energy swept the area. The weapons were based on research into the frequencies that disrupted spiritual manifestations, essentially forcing ghosts and other supernatural beings back into their native dimensions. Retreat for now, the lead entity's voice echoed as it faded. But this war has only begun. We will return with greater numbers, and your weapons will not save you then. The fog cleared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving me alone on Highway 1 with 3 helicopters full of federal agents and enough questions to fill a library. Agent Martinez rappelled down from the lead aircraft, her expression grim but satisfied. Good work, Sergeant. You confirmed what we suspected. These entities are operating under some kind of legal framework that gives them authority to reclaim territory if certain conditions are met. What kind of conditions? We're still researching that, but we think it has to do with spiritual energy levels. The more souls that use the highway network, the more power these ancient things accumulate. They've been manipulating events to increase traffic on the pathways, building up enough spiritual energy to break whatever bonds were holding them. The implications were staggering. Every ghost driver I'd helped, every soul I'd guided to peace, had potentially contributed to weakening the barriers that kept these entities in check. My compassionate work had been turned into a weapon against humanity. So, what do we do now? Now, we learn to fight a war that most people don't even know exists, and we figure out how to shut down parts of the spiritual highway network without trapping innocent souls in the process. The war against the ancient entities lasted 3 years, and cost more lives than any conflict in American history, though most of the casualties were never reported to the public. The enemy used the spiritual highway network to appear anywhere along the West Coast without warning, manifesting in populated areas and causing chaos that looked like natural disasters or terrorist attacks to anyone who didn't know the truth. San Francisco experienced what the media called a series of gas line explosions, when ancient entities emerged from the spiritual pathways running beneath the city's financial district. The real cause was psychic eruptions that ruptured underground pipes and started fires that burned for days. Los Angeles suffered through what meteorologists described as unprecedented seismic activity, but was actually the result of massive entities trying to force their way through dimensional barriers beneath the city. The earthquake damage was really the aftermath of battles between federal task forces and beings that could reshape reality with their thoughts. Seattle endured months of unusual weather patterns that were really the side effects of ancient entities trying to open permanent gateways in the Olympic Mountains. The storms, floods, and electrical disturbances were just physical manifestations of supernatural conflicts being fought in dimensions most humans couldn't perceive. The breakthrough came when Dr. Jennifer Walsh discovered the original compact in a collection of Native American oral histories that had been preserved by tribal elders for over 1,000 years. The agreement wasn't written down. It existed as a series of spiritual ceremonies and spoken promises that had been passed down through generations of shamans and medicine workers. According to the histories, the compact had been made during a time when the physical and spiritual worlds were much closer together, when ancient entities moved freely between dimensions and humans were just beginning to develop the spiritual awareness necessary for complex supernatural negotiations. The agreement was simple but profound. Humans would have dominion over the physical realm, while the ancient entities would rule the spiritual pathways and the spaces between worlds. Both sides could travel between dimensions, but only under specific circumstances and with proper authorization from the other party. The spiritual highway network had developed as humanity's side of the bargain, a way for human souls to travel between worlds without infringing on the ancient entity's territory. But the massive increase in traffic over the past decade had overwhelmed the system, creating unauthorized crossings that violated the compact's terms. "It's like we've been accidentally trespassing," Dr. Walsh explained during our final strategy meeting. "Every ghost driver you've helped, every soul that's used the network to cross over, has technically been breaking the original agreement. The ancient entities have the legal right, by whatever laws govern these things, to reclaim their territory and punish us for the violations. So, what's the solution? We need to renegotiate the compact, update the terms to account for changes in human population and spiritual awareness. But that requires finding representatives who can speak for both sides with full authority to make binding agreements." The negotiations took place at a location that existed simultaneously in the physical and spiritual worlds. a cave system beneath the Santa Monica Mountains that had been sacred to local Native American tribes for thousands of years. Our team included tribal elders, religious leaders from multiple traditions, government officials with authority to make binding commitments on behalf of the United States, and spiritual practitioners who could communicate directly with the ancient entities. The ancient entities sent 3 representatives, beings so old and powerful that their presence made reality itself seem unstable. They appeared as shifting geometric forms that hurt to look at directly, communicating through harmonics that bypassed human hearing and spoke directly to the listener's consciousness. The negotiations lasted 17 days. Every detail of the spiritual highway network had to be discussed, from traffic flow regulations to dimensional crossing protocols. The ancient entities wanted severe restrictions on human use of the pathways, arguing that our species had proven incapable of responsible supernatural citizenship. Our representatives fought for terms that would preserve the network's humanitarian functions while addressing the entity's legitimate concerns about territorial violations. The compromise that emerged was complex but workable. Under the new compact, human souls could continue using the spiritual highway network, but only under regulated conditions. Traffic levels would be monitored and limited to prevent system overload. Certain high-traffic routes would be temporarily closed for maintenance and repair. And most importantly, formal crossing points would be established where human and ancient entity territories intersected, with designated guardians to ensure that both sides respected the new boundaries. I was offered the position of Chief Guardian for the California section of the network. Essentially, Supernatural Highway Patrol Commander for the entire state. The job would mean giving up regular police work and dedicating myself full-time to maintaining the balance between worlds. It was an easy choice. The new system has been operational for 2 years now, and the results have been remarkable. Ghost driver incidents have decreased by 90%. Not because fewer souls need help, but because the network is functioning more efficiently. Proper spiritual traffic management means that most crossings happen smoothly, without the confusion and terror that used to characterize supernatural encounters. My team now includes both human officers and ancient entity liaison, beings who can communicate with lost souls in languages that predate human civilization and guide them to appropriate crossings without the traumatic encounters that used to be necessary. The work is still dangerous, still emotionally demanding, but it's also more rewarding than anything I did in traditional law enforcement. Every successful crossing represents not just one soul finding peace, but a small contribution to the stability of reality itself. The spiritual highway network extends far beyond California now. Similar systems have been established across the globe, all connected by pathways that allow souls to travel vast distances in pursuit of their final destinations. My counterparts include former police officers in Ireland who guide the spirits of famine victims, ex-military personnel in Japan who help the ghosts of samurai warriors, and indigenous shamans in Australia who maintain Dreamtime crossings that have existed for 40,000 years. We communicate through methods that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Psychic networks, spiritual radio frequencies, and meeting protocols that allow us to gather in locations that exist outside normal space and time. The work has taught me that reality is far more flexible than I ever imagined, and that human understanding of existence has barely scratched the surface of what's actually possible. But for all the cosmic implications and supernatural complexity, the core of the work remains simple: helping lost souls find their way home. I still patrol Highway 1 on foggy nights, still respond to calls about abandoned vehicles and missing persons. But now I understand that I'm part of something much larger than local law enforcement. A global network of guardians who maintain the balance between life and death. between the physical world and whatever lies beyond. The ghost drivers still come, drawn by grief or confusion or unfinished business. But now they find a system designed to help them, staffed by beings who understand their needs and can guide them safely to whatever comes next. The fear and desperation that used to characterize supernatural encounters has been replaced by a process that's still mysterious, but no longer terrifying. Sometimes, on the clearest nights when the marine layer stays out at sea and the stars are visible all the way to the horizon, I can see the spiritual pathways that run parallel to Highway 1. They glow with soft light that only trained observers can perceive, carrying streams of souls between the world of the living and whatever destinations await them in death. The sight is both beautiful and humbling. Every point of light represents a journey that began with someone's last breath and will end with their arrival at eternal rest. My job is to ensure that those journeys are completed safely, that no soul gets lost between worlds, that the ancient compact between humanity and the older inhabitants of reality continues to hold. It's work that requires skills they don't teach at the police academy, meditation techniques for communicating with non-corporeal entities, protective rituals for surviving psychic combat, diplomatic protocols for negotiating with beings whose thought processes are fundamentally alien to human consciousness. But at its heart, supernatural law enforcement isn't that different from regular police work. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves, maintaining order in chaotic situations, and serving something larger than your own interests. The only difference is that some of the people you're protecting happen to be dead, and some of the chaos involves violations of physics that would make Einstein weep. The badge I wear now isn't issued by the California Highway Patrol. It's made of materials that don't exist in normal reality, inscribed with symbols that shift and change depending on who's looking at them. But it serves the same purpose as the metal shield I used to carry, identifying me as someone who's sworn to serve and protect, no matter what strange circumstances that service might require. Highway 1 still winds along the California coast, still carries tourists and commuters between San Francisco and Los Angeles. But it also carries something else now, a stream of souls making their final journeys, guided by guardians who understand that death is not an ending, but a transformation. Every sunset, I park at the overlook near Point Mugu and watch the spiritual traffic flow along the pathways that parallel the physical highway. Hundreds of souls, traveling in vehicles made of memory and hope, heading toward destinations that exist beyond the reach of human understanding. They're going home, all of them, and I'm here to make sure they arrive safely. The fog still rolls in from the Pacific on autumn nights, but it no longer brings the terror and confusion that used to characterize supernatural encounters. Now, it brings peace, carrying the voices of souls who've found their destinations and are calling back to those still making the journey. Safe travels, they whisper. The road is clear, the guardians are watching. Come home. And one by one, light by light, they do. The work continues. The compact holds. The highway remains open for all travelers, living and dead alike. Highway 1 has always been more than just a road. It's been a bridge between worlds, a pathway between what was and what will be. Now, officially and openly, it serves that purpose for everyone who needs it, including some passengers I still can't always see, but who I know are there, making their way safely through the fog toward whatever waits for them at the end of their final ride. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in September, and I should have known it was going to be one of those shifts that stays with you forever. My name is Officer Rebecca Thompson, San Diego Police Department, Southern Division. I've been working the border beat for 6 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the night shift could throw at me. Drug smugglers, human traffickers, gang violence that spills over from Tijuana like toxic waste. But nothing had prepared me for what waited at 4247 Calle Vista that night. The Santa Ana winds were blowing hot and dry from the desert, turning the air electric with dust and making everyone a little crazy. These winds always brought trouble. Domestic calls doubled, bar fights multiplied, and even the most level-headed people started making decisions they'd regret by morning. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio with that tight edge that meant serious business. Unit 7 David 12. Respond to domestic disturbance at 4247 Calle Vista. Possible weapons involved. Caller reported screaming and sounds of a struggle. I was partnered with Officer Michael Rodriguez that night. Rodriguez had 12 years on the force, all of them in Southern Division. He knew every alley, every gang tag, every family feud in our sector. More importantly, he knew when to push and when to walk away. In border policing, that instinct could mean the difference between going home and going to the morgue. Copy dispatch, 7 David 12 responding. Rodriguez said into the radio, already turning our patrol unit south toward the residential neighborhoods that bordered the fence line. These were the forgotten communities of San Diego, where working families mixed with recent immigrants, legal and otherwise. Good people trying to make honest livings, but also plenty of opportunities for those who preferred their money fast and dirty. Calle Vista turned out to be one of those narrow streets where houses sat close together like nervous animals. Small yards protected by chain link and razor wire. Number 4247 was a single-story bungalow painted institutional green, with a covered porch and bars on every window. Light spilled from behind closed curtains, and we could hear raised voices even before we killed the engine. Sounds like Spanish, Rodriguez muttered, adjusting his radio and checking his weapon. Family argument, maybe domestic violence. We approached according to standard procedure. Rodriguez on the hinge side, me on the knob side, both staying clear of the door frame in case someone decided to start shooting through it. The voices inside were getting louder. A man and woman definitely arguing, but the words were coming too fast for my limited Spanish to follow. Rodriguez knocked with his flashlight. San Diego police, open the door, please. The voices stopped immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. We waited, listening to the Santa Ana winds rattle palm fronds overhead and send trash skittering across the street like urban tumbleweeds. After about 30 seconds, Rodriguez knocked again, harder this time. Police, we need to speak with you. Open the door. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. The porch light came on, and I could see movement behind the peephole. More waiting, then the sound of multiple locks being turned. The door opened about 6 inches, held by a security chain. A middle-aged Latina woman peered out at us. Short, gray hair, worried eyes, wearing a house dress that looked like she'd thrown it on quickly. Behind her, the house had gone quiet, but I could smell something that made my nose wrinkle. Not exactly rotting, but not fresh either, like meat that had been left out just a little too long. "Officers," she said in accented but clear English. "What can I do for you?" "Ma'am, we received a call about a domestic disturbance at this address. Are you all right?" She glanced over her shoulder nervously, then back at us. "Domestic disturbance?" "No, officers, everything is fine here, just watching television, maybe it was too loud." Rodriguez stepped closer to the gap in the door. "Ma'am, we heard voices arguing when we arrived. Is there someone else in the house?" Another quick look over her shoulder. "My husband, he is not feeling well today. Very tired, you understand. The heat makes him sick." I could hear something now, coming from deeper in the house. Not voices this time, but a rhythmic sound like someone walking back and forth. Pacing. Heavy footsteps on wood floors, but irregular, like someone stumbling. "Ma'am, we need to come in and make sure everyone is safe," I said. "It'll just take a few minutes." Her face changed, worry shifting to something like fear. "Officers, please. My husband is very sick. He needs rest. Can you come back tomorrow in the daytime?" The footsteps inside were getting louder. Not just pacing now, but erratic, like someone having trouble maintaining their balance. Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. Something was definitely wrong here, and it wasn't just a loud television. "Ma'am, I need you to unlock the chain and let us in," Rodriguez said firmly. "We can't leave until we verify that everyone in the house is safe." She started to protest, but the footsteps suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard a man's voice calling from the back of the house. But the words weren't in Spanish or English. They sounded like groaning, like someone in serious pain or distress. That decided it. Rodriguez pushed gently against the door. "Ma'am, unlock the chain now. Someone in there needs help." She must have heard the authority in his voice because after another terrified glance backward, she fumbled with the chain and opened the door. We stepped into a small living room that felt oppressively hot despite the air conditioning running full blast. The smell I'd noticed outside was much stronger in here. Sweet and cloying like flowers mixed with something organic and unpleasant. The woman, she told us her name was Maria Hernandez, stood wringing her hands by the door. "Please, officers, be very quiet. My husband Eduardo, he has been sick for 3 days. High fever, very confused. I think maybe he has that flu that's been going around." The groaning came again from what looked like a bedroom at the end of a short hallway. It didn't sound like any flu victim I'd ever heard. It sounded like someone in agony, or someone whose vocal cords weren't working properly anymore. Rodriguez moved toward the hallway, hand resting on his service weapon. "Mr. Hernandez, this is the police. We're here to help." More groaning, and then the sound of something heavy falling over. Maria cried out and pushed past us toward the bedroom. "Eduardo, no, stay in bed. The officers just want to help." We followed her down the hall. The smell got stronger with every step, and by the time we reached the bedroom door, I was breathing through my mouth to keep from gagging. Rodriguez had his flashlight out, even though the overhead light was on. The bedroom was small and cramped, dominated by a queen-size bed with rumpled, stained sheets. Eduardo Hernandez sat on the edge of the bed, and one look at him told me this wasn't the flu or any other normal illness. He was a big man, probably 60 years old, wearing pajama pants and a stained undershirt. But his skin had a grayish pallor that looked wrong under the bedroom lights, and his eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. Sweat covered his face and arms, but it wasn't normal sweat. It was thick and oily, like his body was leaking something other than water. "Mr. Hernandez," Rodriguez said carefully, "how are you feeling, sir?" Eduardo looked up at us, and I saw Maria step protectively between her husband and our guns. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out, and when it did, it was that same groaning we'd heard from the living room. Not words, just sound. Animal sound. "He cannot speak," Maria said quickly. "The fever, it has affected his mind, but he is getting better, I promise. Tomorrow he will be fine." I'd seen enough sick people in 6 years of police work to know that Eduardo Hernandez was not getting better. Whatever was wrong with him was getting worse, and it wasn't any flu or fever I'd ever encountered. His eyes kept tracking movement that wasn't there, like he was watching invisible insects fly around the room. Rodriguez keyed his radio. "Control, 7 David 12. We're going to need paramedics at 4247 Calle Vista. Sick male, possible medical emergency." Maria grabbed Rodriguez's arm. "No, please, no paramedics. Eduardo, he is afraid of hospitals. They will not understand his condition." "Ma'am, your husband needs medical attention," I said. "Look at him. This isn't something that's going to get better on its own." But even as I said it, I wondered what kind of medical attention would help. Eduardo was now staring directly at me with those bloodshot eyes, and there was something in his expression that made the hair on my arms stand up. Not recognition exactly, but awareness, like a predator sizing up prey. He stood up from the bed, moving with surprising steadiness for someone who had seemed so sick moments before. Maria tried to push him back down, but he brushed her aside easily, too easily. She was a small woman, but that casual gesture should have been harder for a sick man. "Mr. Hernandez, please sit back down," Rodriguez said, his hand moving to his weapon. "The paramedics are on their way to help you." Eduardo tilted his head, studying Rodriguez like he was trying to remember something. Then his mouth opened wider than it should have been able to, and that groaning sound came out again. But this time it was louder, and it went on longer than human lungs should have been able to sustain. I stepped backward toward the bedroom door, every instinct screaming that we needed to get out of this house. But Rodriguez was still trying to de-escalate, still treating this like a normal domestic call with a sick man who needed help. "Sir, I need you to remain calm. Help is coming." Eduardo's head turned toward Rodriguez with mechanical precision, like a camera tracking a target. The groaning stopped, and for a moment the room was silent, except for the air conditioning and Maria's quiet sobbing. Then Eduardo smiled. It wasn't a human smile. His lips pulled back too far, showing teeth that looked longer and sharper than they should have been. And his eyes, those bloodshot eyes, never blinked, not once. "Rodriguez," I said quietly, "we need to go, now." But Rodriguez was trained to help people, and his training was overriding his instincts. "Mr. Hernandez, I'm going to need you to sit down and wait for the paramedics." Eduardo took a step toward Rodriguez, then another. His movement was wrong, like he was learning how to walk all over again, but he was getting better at it with each step. Maria threw herself between them. "Please, officers, just leave us alone. Eduardo will be fine by morning, I promise. This happens sometimes, but it always passes. This happens sometimes." I grabbed Maria by the shoulders. "What do you mean, this happens sometimes?" She looked at me with eyes full of terror and something else. Guilt, maybe, or resignation. "The fever, it comes and goes. Started 3 months ago, after Eduardo got sick at work." "What kind of work does he do?" "Construction. They are building new houses in the hills near the reservation. Sometimes they find things when they dig foundations. Old things." "What kind of old things?" "Bones, pottery, things the Indians left behind. Eduardo, he took some pieces home. Pretty pieces, carved stones. I told him to take them back, but he said they were just rocks. The paramedics' sirens were getting closer, but I had a horrible feeling they were going to be too late. Eduardo was still advancing on Rodriguez, and that wrong smile was getting wider. The smell in the room was getting stronger too, like roadkill in the summer heat. Rodriguez finally drew his weapon. "Mr. Hernandez, stop where you are. Don't make me use this." Eduardo paused, head tilting again like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then he laughed, and the sound made my spine crawl. It was too deep, too resonant, like it was coming from somewhere other than his throat. "Officer Rodriguez," I said, backing toward the door. "Whatever that is, it's not Eduardo Hernandez anymore." But it was too late. Eduardo lunged forward with inhuman speed, moving faster than any sick man should have been able to. Rodriguez tried to step back, tried to create distance, but Eduardo's hands were already reaching for him. I drew my weapon and aimed, but Maria was still between them, screaming in Spanish, trying to protect her husband from what she couldn't understand. Eduardo's fingers wrapped around Rodriguez's throat, and I could see them sinking into the flesh like the skin was made of soft clay. Rodriguez fired twice, a center mass, perfect shots that should have dropped any normal person. But Eduardo didn't even flinch. The bullets hit him and seemed to disappear, like they'd been absorbed rather than striking solid matter. Rodriguez's eyes were bulging now, his face turning purple as Eduardo's grip tightened. I had a clear shot, but something told me bullets weren't going to stop whatever Eduardo had become. "Let him go!" I shouted, but Eduardo ignored me completely. His attention was focused entirely on Rodriguez, and his smile was getting even wider, showing more teeth than any human mouth should have been able to hold. That's when I noticed the carved stones. They were scattered around the bedroom, on the dresser, the nightstand, even the windowsill. Small pieces of what looked like black obsidian, carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them directly. They were warm to the touch. I could feel the heat radiating from them even across the room. I grabbed the nearest stone and immediately felt a jolt of something like electricity shoot up my arm. The symbols on its surface began to glow with a sickly green light, and Eduardo's head snapped toward me with predatory focus. "You should not touch that, little policewoman," he said, and his voice was wrong too. Multiple voices speaking in unison, like a dozen people talking at once. "Those are not toys for children to play with." Rodriguez had gone limp in Eduardo's grip, either unconscious or worse. I kept the stone raised, using it like a weapon, even though I didn't know what it was supposed to do. "Let him go, and we can talk about this." Eduardo laughed again, that horrible multi-toned sound. "There is nothing to discuss. The awakening has begun. The old ones stir in their sleep, and soon they will walk the earth again. This man's body will serve as their first vessel. The old ones? The true owners of this land. The ones who ruled here before your kind learned to make fire. They have been waiting, patient in their stone houses beneath the hills. But now the barriers weaken, and they can touch the world of flesh once more." I thought about what Maria had said. Eduardo worked construction, building houses near the reservation. If they'd been digging foundations and disturbing ancient burial sites or sacred ground, they might have awakened something that was supposed to stay buried. "The stones," I said. "They're some kind of key, aren't they? A way for these old ones to possess people." Eduardo's smile became impossibly wide. "Very good, little policewoman. Yes, the stones are keys, and your friend here will be the first door they open." Rodriguez stirred in Eduardo's grip, gasping for air. His eyes were open but unfocused, like he was seeing things that weren't there. Or maybe things that were there but invisible to normal sight. I needed to get those stones away from Eduardo, but there were dozens of them scattered around the room. Even if I could gather them all, I didn't know how to stop whatever process had already begun. That's when the paramedics arrived. I heard them at the front door, calling out standard paramedic protocol. Maria ran toward the sound, probably hoping they could help her husband, but I knew they were just walking into a trap. "Don't come in here," I shouted toward the front of the house. "Call for backup. We need—" Eduardo moved faster than anything human should have been able to move. One moment he was holding Rodriguez by the throat, the next he was across the room, his hand clamping over my mouth. His skin felt wrong, too cold, too soft, like touching raw meat. "No more talking, little policewoman. You will watch as the first vessel is completed, and then you will become the second." Rodriguez was on the floor now, convulsing like he was having a seizure, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and his mouth was moving silently, like he was having a conversation with someone only he could see. The carved stones around the room were all glowing now, pulsing in unison like a heartbeat. The temperature in the room was dropping despite the air conditioning being turned off, and I could see my breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. "What are you doing to him?" "Preparing him," Eduardo said, his multiple voices sounding almost sing-song now. "His mind must be emptied before it can be filled. His memories, his personality, his very soul, all must be scooped out like meat from a shell. Then there will be room for a proper inhabitant." Rodriguez's convulsions were getting worse. His back arched off the floor, and his limbs twisted at angles that looked painful. But there was no expression of pain on his face, just blank, empty staring. The paramedics were in the house now. I could hear them calling out, looking for us. In a few seconds they'd reach the bedroom, and then whatever was possessing Eduardo would have 4 potential vessels instead of just 2. I still had my gun, but bullets obviously weren't going to work. I still had the carved stone in my other hand, warm and pulsing with that sickly green light. Maybe if I could destroy it or throw it away from the others. I smashed the stone against the bedroom wall as hard as I could. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Eduardo screamed, not with his throat, but with his whole body, a sound that came from every pore and made the windows rattle. His grip on me loosened enough for me to pull away. The other stones around the room flickered, their glow dimming for a moment. Rodriguez's convulsions slowed, and his eyes seemed to focus slightly. "The stones!" I shouted to anyone who could hear me. "Destroy the stones!" But Eduardo was already moving, gathering the carved pieces with supernatural speed. His human disguise was slipping now. His skin was becoming translucent, showing something dark and writhing underneath. His limbs were stretching, joints bending in directions they weren't supposed to go. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he snarled, his voice becoming less human with each word. "The vessels will be prepared, the old ones will rise, and your world will remember its true masters." The paramedics reached the bedroom doorway just as Eduardo finished collecting the stones. They took one look at the scene, Rodriguez convulsing on the floor, me backed against the wall with my gun drawn, and something that used to be Eduardo Hernandez but was rapidly becoming something else entirely. And they did exactly what their training told them to do. They ran. Smart choice. I wished I could join them, but Rodriguez was still down and I couldn't leave my partner behind. Even if he was being used as raw material for some kind of supernatural possession ritual. Eduardo, or whatever was wearing Eduardo's body, arranged the stones in a circle around Rodriguez's still form. They were glowing brighter now, and the air above them was starting to shimmer like heat rising from summer asphalt. "You will watch," the thing said to me. "You will see how easily your kind can be improved, and then you will beg for the privilege of joining him." Rodriguez's eyes suddenly snapped into focus, looking directly at me. His mouth moved, forming words I could barely hear over the humming that was coming from the stones. "Thompson," he whispered, the fire axe in the truck." Fire axe, of course. The paramedics would have emergency equipment, including tools designed to break through walls and doors. Tools that might work on carved stone as well as wood and drywall. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," I said, keeping my gun trained on the Eduardo thing even though I knew it wouldn't do any good. "Just hang on." I started backing toward the bedroom door, keeping the weapon raised. The Eduardo thing watched me go with amusement, not bothering to follow. It was confident that its ritual would be completed before I could do anything to stop it. Maybe it was right, but I had to try. The hallway felt like a wind tunnel, with cold air rushing past me toward the bedroom. It carried whispers in languages I didn't recognize, and the smell of earth and decay, like a grave being opened. The paramedics were huddled by their ambulance, radios crackling as they called for police backup. When they saw me emerge from the house, one of them, a young guy with shaking hands, pointed toward their equipment. "Fire axe," I said. "Where?" He pointed to a compartment on the side of the ambulance. I yanked it open and grabbed the axe, hefting its reassuring weight. Maybe steel and wood couldn't stop a supernatural possession, but they might be able to destroy the tools that made it possible. "Stay back," I told the paramedics. "Don't go in there no matter what you hear." I ran back into the house, following the sound of that otherworldly humming toward the bedroom. The temperature was dropping with every step, and frost was forming on the walls despite the September heat outside. Rodriguez was floating now. Not metaphorically, literally floating about 3 feet off the bedroom floor, suspended in the center of the circle of glowing stones. His body was rigid, arms spread wide, eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. The humming was coming from him now, that same harmonious sound that had been emanating from the stones. The Eduardo thing stood at the foot of the bed, arms raised like a conductor directing an orchestra. Its human appearance was almost completely gone now, replaced by something tall and angular that seemed to be made of shadows and sharp edges. "Too late, little policewoman," it said without turning around. "The first vessel is nearly ready. Soon it will house one of the great old kings, and your world will have its first new ruler in 10,000 years." The stones were pulsing faster now, their green light so bright it hurt to look at directly. Rodriguez's body was beginning to change, skin taking on a grayish pallor similar to what Eduardo had shown earlier. But this was different. Not sickness, but transformation. I raised the fire axe and brought it down on the nearest carved stone. The impact sent shockwaves through the room. The stone shattered into a dozen pieces, and immediately the light from the others dimmed. Rodriguez dropped about a foot, though he was still floating above the floor. The Eduardo thing spun toward me, its face a nightmare of too many teeth and eyes that burned like coals. "You dare?" "Damn right I dare," I said, moving to the next stone. "This is my city, my beat, my partner. And I don't care how old your kings are, they're not welcome here." I smashed the second stone, then a third. Each impact weakened the circle, and Rodriguez dropped lower each time. The Eduardo thing lunged at me, but its movements were becoming sluggish as the ritual lost power. "You cannot stop!" It gasped, its multiple voices becoming discordant. "Watch me," I said, and brought the axe down on 3 stones at once. The circle collapsed. Rodriguez fell to the floor with a bone-jarring thud, but his eyes snapped open and focused. The unnatural humming stopped, replaced by the normal sounds of a house at night. Air conditioning, distant traffic, the Eduardo thing's dying gasps. Because it was dying. Without the stones to anchor it, whatever had been possessing Eduardo's body was losing its grip on the physical world. The shadow thing was becoming translucent, fading like morning mist. "This is not over," it whispered. "The barriers weaken. The old ones will find another way." And then it was gone, leaving behind only Eduardo Hernandez's body, unconscious but breathing normally. His skin had returned to its natural color, and the wrongness that had surrounded him like an aura was completely absent. Rodriguez sat up slowly, rubbing his head. "Thompson, what the hell happened?" "Long story, partner. How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck, and like I've been having the weirdest dreams." He looked around the bedroom, taking in the shattered stones and frost-covered walls. "Please tell me this wasn't all a hallucination." Not unless we're both having the same one. Police backup arrived 20 minutes later, followed by detectives, crime scene technicians, and eventually federal agents who seemed very interested in the broken stones and wanted to take possession of all the fragments. They also wanted detailed statements from Rodriguez and me, though they seemed skeptical of our accounts until they started running tests on the stone pieces. Eduardo Hernandez was taken to the hospital for observation. According to the doctors, he had no memory of the past 3 days and no idea how he'd gotten sick. Medical tests showed traces of unknown organic compounds in his bloodstream, but nothing that matched any known toxins or diseases. Maria Hernandez was questioned extensively about where her husband had found the carved stones. She led investigators to the construction site near the reservation, where they discovered what appeared to be an ancient burial ground that had been partially disturbed during foundation digging. The site was immediately closed and turned over to archaeological teams and tribal authorities. What they found there was never made public, but rumor had it that the burial ground was much older than anyone had expected, pre-Columbian, possibly pre-human. Rodriguez and I were debriefed by federal agents who seemed to know a lot more about supernatural phenomena than local cops usually encountered. They made it clear that our reports would be classified and that we were not to discuss the incident with anyone, including other officers. This kind of thing happens more often than you might think, Agent Sarah Kim told us during our final interview. Ancient sites get disturbed, old things wake up, people get possessed or transformed. We have teams that specialize in containment and cleanup. Teams? I asked. The world is a stranger place than most people realize, Officer Thompson. There are things that exist in the spaces between what we call reality, and sometimes they try to break through. When they do, we're the ones who push them back. Rodriguez and I returned to regular patrol duty the next week, but something had changed. We both found ourselves paying more attention to the subtle signs that most cops learn to ignore, the feeling of being watched, the sense that a house or neighborhood had wrongness to it, the instinct that told you when a domestic call was more than just a domestic call. 6 months later, Agent Kim contacted me with a job offer. The federal task force that dealt with supernatural incidents was looking for experienced law enforcement officers who had proven themselves capable of handling paranormal threats. The pay was better, the cases were stranger, and the work was more dangerous than regular police duty. I turned it down. Rodriguez and I had a good thing going in Southern Division, and San Diego had plenty of regular crime to keep us busy. Besides, after what we'd seen at 4247 Calle Vista, I wasn't sure I wanted to make a career out of fighting ancient evils and supernatural possessions. But the offer stayed open, and Agent Kim checked in with us periodically. Just in case we changed our minds, she said, or in case San Diego's supernatural problems got bigger than the local police could handle. For a while, things stayed quiet. We worked our regular beats, handled our regular calls, and almost managed to convince ourselves that the Eduardo Hernandez incident had been a one-time anomaly. Some kind of freak event that wouldn't repeat itself. We were wrong. The second incident happened 8 months later, in a different part of the Southern Division but with unsettling similarities to the first case. Another construction worker, another disturbed burial ground, another set of carved stones. This time, it was a woman named Carmen Santos who started showing the same symptoms Eduardo had displayed. The grayish skin, the wrongness, the sense that something else was looking out through her eyes. Rodriguez and I responded to the call, but this time we were better prepared. We brought fire axes in our patrol unit, along with salt, holy water, and a direct radio link to Agent Kim's task force. The federal agents arrived within an hour, bringing equipment and expertise that let them contain the situation before it got as far out of hand as the Hernandez case had. Carmen Santos survived the possession, though, like Eduardo, she had no memory of what had happened to her. The carved stones were destroyed under controlled conditions, and the burial site was sealed using methods that Agent Kim described as more than just archaeological. But the pattern was becoming clear. San Diego's rapid development was bringing construction crews into contact with ancient sites that had been undisturbed for centuries or millennia. And some of those sites contained things that didn't appreciate being awakened. "It's going to get worse," Agent Kim warned during our post-incident briefing. "This is just the beginning. The suburban sprawl is pushing deeper into areas that used to be wilderness, and a lot of that wilderness has secrets buried under it." She was right. Over the next 2 years, Rodriguez and I responded to 17 more incidents involving supernatural possessions, ancient artifacts, and construction workers who brought home more than just paychecks. Each case was different in the details, but similar in the overall pattern. Someone disturbs an old site, takes artifacts they shouldn't, and becomes a vessel for something that doesn't belong in the modern world. We got good at recognizing the signs. The phone calls from family members reporting strange behavior, the smell of decay mixed with flowers, the way ordinary houses suddenly felt wrong when you walked into them, the look in someone's eyes when they weren't quite themselves anymore. But we also learned that not every case had a happy ending. 3 times we arrived too late to save the possessed person. Twice we encountered entities that were too powerful to be stopped by broken stones and fire axes. Once we lost a federal agent to something that used to be a suburban housewife, but had become a conduit for an intelligence older than human civilization. The work was taking its toll. Rodriguez started drinking more than he used to, and his wife began complaining that he was distant and preoccupied. I found myself checking locks multiple times before bed and avoiding construction sites even when I was off duty. After the 17th incident, Agent Kim made her offer again. This time, she included Rodriguez in the invitation. "You've both proven yourselves," she said. "You understand the threats. You know how to handle the tools, and you've survived encounters that would have killed or driven insane most normal officers. The task force needs people like you." This time, Rodriguez was tempted. Better pay, better equipment, and we'd be part of a team that actually knows what we're dealing with, he pointed out. Instead of fumbling around, hoping we get lucky, I understood the appeal. The federal task force had resources that local police could never match, and they were fighting a war that most people didn't even know existed. There was honor in that kind of work, purpose that went beyond writing traffic tickets and breaking up bar fights. But there was also something to be said for staying local, for being the first line of defense in our own community. San Diego was home, and Southern Division was our beat. If ancient evils were going to keep popping up in suburban neighborhoods, then somebody needed to be there who understood what they were dealing with. "1 more year," I told Agent Kim. "Let us finish our commitments here, and then we'll consider it." That year taught us more about the supernatural underground than all our previous experience combined. We discovered that the construction worker incidents were just the tip of the iceberg. San Diego's proximity to the Mexican border created a corridor for supernatural traffic, as well as human smuggling. Things that should have stayed buried in the desert were being awakened by increased border security patrols. Ancient trade routes that had carried more than just goods were being reactivated by modern immigration patterns. The border fence itself seemed to attract paranormal activity. Ghost riders who had died crossing the desert appeared regularly along certain sections, usually during new moon periods when visibility was at its lowest. Some were harmless spirits seeking peace, but others were angry entities that had been twisted by violence and desperation into something malevolent. We started carrying more than just fire axes and holy water. Agent Kim provided us with equipment that wasn't available through normal police channels. electromagnetic field detectors, cameras that could capture images outside the normal spectrum, communication devices that worked on frequencies spirits could access. The training sessions became more formal too. Once a month, federal agents would meet with us and other local officers who had encountered supernatural phenomena. We learned about different types of entities, proper containment procedures, and early warning signs that indicated when a situation was escalating beyond local capabilities. But the most important lesson was that we weren't alone. There were dozens of law enforcement officers throughout San Diego County who had encountered things that didn't belong in the official reports. Border Patrol agents who had seen ghost caravans crossing the desert. Sheriff's deputies who had investigated disappearances that involved more than just human trafficking. Even park rangers who had dealt with ancient guardians awakened by hikers who wandered into restricted areas. We formed an informal network, sharing information and resources outside the normal chain of command. When someone reported a case that sounded supernatural, word would spread through back channels to officers who had the experience and equipment to handle it properly. The network's first real test came during the summer of my 8th year on the force. A series of construction projects along the border had disturbed what archaeologists later determined was a major ceremonial site, possibly dating back to pre-Columbian civilizations. Instead of isolated incidents involving individual artifacts, we were dealing with a coordinated supernatural event that affected multiple locations simultaneously. The first sign of trouble came from Border Patrol. Agents reported that electronic equipment was malfunctioning along a 10-mile stretch of the fence, and several officers had seen lights moving through the desert at night without any corresponding heat signatures on their thermal imaging systems. Then, construction workers at 3 different sites started calling in sick with identical symptoms: grayish skin, confusion, and the sense that they were being watched by invisible presences. Unlike previous cases, these workers hadn't taken home any artifacts. The possessions were happening on site during working hours. Rodriguez and I responded to the first construction site incident, along with backup from our supernatural network and a full federal task force team. What we found was unlike anything we had encountered before. The construction site had been abandoned by its workers, but the equipment was still running. Bulldozers drove themselves in perfect circles, their operators' seats empty. Excavators dug systematically, following patterns that had nothing to do with the planned building foundation, and everything to do with some older design that was emerging from beneath the earth. "They're uncovering something," Agent Kim said, studying aerial photos of the site. "Something big. Look at the pattern. It's not random digging. The machines are following some kind of blueprint that's buried underground." She was right. From above, you could see that the excavation was revealing the outline of a massive structure. Not a building in any conventional sense, but a geometric pattern of intersecting lines and circles that stretched across several acres. It looked like a map or diagram, carved into the bedrock itself. "How old is it?" Rodriguez asked. "Older than anything that should exist in this region," Agent Kim replied. "Our archaeological consultants are saying pre-Columbian, possibly pre-human. Whatever civilization built this predates known historical records by thousands of years." The possessed construction equipment was working 24 hours a day, operated by invisible hands. We tried shutting off fuel supplies and disconnecting batteries, but the machines kept running on power sources that didn't show up on any instruments. Even more disturbing, they seemed to be self-repairing. Damaged hydraulic lines would seal themselves overnight. Broken tracks would reassemble without human intervention. "We need to stop this before they finish whatever they're uncovering," Agent Kim said. "Our remote sensors are detecting massive electromagnetic anomalies beneath the site. If this pattern gets completed, we could be looking at a dimensional breach large enough to allow through entities that make the possession cases look like minor irritations." The first attempt to stop the excavation involved jamming equipment that should have disabled any electronic systems within a mile radius. The possessed machines didn't even slow down. If anything, they seemed to work faster, as if they were racing against some deadline. The second attempt used electromagnetic pulse weapons designed specifically for supernatural applications. The weapons worked, but only temporarily. The machines would stop for a few hours, then restart themselves with increased efficiency. "They're learning," Dr. Jennifer Walsh observed during our third failed intervention. She was a psychologist who specialized in supernatural phenomena, brought in as a consultant when it became clear that we were dealing with intelligences rather than simple possessions. Each time we try to stop them, they adapt. Whatever is controlling those machines is getting smarter. That's when we realized we weren't just dealing with ancient artifacts awakening random spirits. This was organized, coordinated, planned. Something with intelligence and purpose was using the construction equipment to complete a project that had been interrupted centuries or millennia ago. 3 days later, the last bulldozer completed its section of the pattern. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The entire excavation site began to glow with the same sickly green light we had seen from the carved stones, but infinitely more intense. The ground began to shake with rhythmic pulses that seemed to come from deep underground. Then the first entity emerged. It rose from the center of the pattern like a living shadow, tall as an office building, and composed of angles that didn't exist in normal geometry. More entities followed, each one different but equally impossible. "This is now a Class 5 supernatural event," Agent Kim announced over the radio. "Recommend immediate evacuation of all civilian populations within 20 miles." The entities weren't staying at the excavation site. They were spreading out, moving across the desert with purpose and direction toward the populated areas of San Diego County. By dawn, downtown San Diego looked like a war zone. The entities were reproducing the excavation pattern in multiple locations: shopping malls, parks, the airport. Each new pattern created more breach points, and each breach point allowed more entities through. They're terraforming, Dr. Walsh realized. Not just invading our reality, but transforming it into something more suitable for their needs. Each completed pattern created a zone where normal physics didn't apply reliably. Cars would drive through walls, gravity would reverse direction randomly, and electronic equipment would spontaneously reshape itself into configurations that served purposes no human engineer could understand. "We need to find the source," Agent Kim said. "The original excavation site is still the primary breach point. If we can close that, we might be able to stop the cascade." But approaching the excavation site had become nearly impossible. The area around it was now a maze of impossible geometry, where the basic laws of physics were more like loose suggestions. That's when Rodriguez had an idea. The construction workers who originally disturbed the site, they were possessed, but they're still alive. Maybe we can use that connection in reverse. Get the entities to shut down the excavation voluntarily. We brought in Eduardo Hernandez and the other construction workers who had been possessed. When Agent Kim ran them through tests designed to detect psychic residue, every single one of them lit up like Christmas trees. "There's definitely something still there," Dr. Walsh confirmed. "Some kind of permanent alteration to their neural patterns." Eduardo volunteered for the dangerous procedure to re-establish contact with the entities. When the psychic connection was activated, his voice changed to that familiar multi-toned harmony. "We see you," he said with obvious effort. "You who broke the stones, stopped the awakening." Through Eduardo, we learned that the entities were older than humanity, older than civilization. They had been the dominant intelligence on Earth millions of years ago, before some catastrophe forced them underground. Climate change was awakening them because Earth's conditions were approaching what had existed during their original reign. This realm belonged to us when your son was young, the entity said through Eduardo. Your kind is a temporary infection. You will be absorbed or eliminated as we deem appropriate. But then the entity's attention focused on me, specifically. The one called Thompson. You will be our gift to the Stone Kings. Your body will house their greatest champion. Eduardo collapsed, but the entity's words echoed in the room. They knew who I was, knew my role in disrupting their previous attempts, and they had plans for me. Agent Kim wanted to evacuate me immediately, but I refused. Did we learn anything useful? Dr. Walsh reviewed the recordings. The entities are operating under some kind of legal framework. They believe they have rightful claim to Earth. If they're following rules, maybe we can use those rules against them. While academics debated cosmic legal principles, Rodriguez and I continued monitoring San Diego. The transformed zones were consolidating rather than expanding rapidly. The entities were building something. The geometric patterns throughout the city formed a vast network that resembled a circuit board more than random graffiti. 3 days later, their machine activated. The sky began showing seams and joints, like it was a constructed ceiling rather than open space. The sun's path became erratic, sometimes moving backward. They're revealing the true nature of local reality, Dr. Walsh explained. They can rewrite the rules of physics within their area of influence. As if to demonstrate, a flock of seagulls flew past, traveling backward through time, regressing from adult birds to chicks to eggs before vanishing entirely. During the evacuation, we encountered the children in Balboa Park. 12 kids who looked normal, but had voices with wrong harmonics underneath. The oldest, a blonde girl about 14, smiled with too many teeth. We were made, not born, she said, created to serve as ambassadors between your kind and ours. They were hybrid entities, appearing human but carrying the ancient consciousness. The girl delivered the same message about returning to natural order, but with an innocent face that made it more disturbing. You'll be processed according to standard procedures for invasive species, she said cheerfully. Some specimens preserved for study, others recycled into more useful forms. Then she focused on me, specifically. The Stone Kings have chosen you as their vessel. The transformation has already begun. 7 days to complete. As we drove away, I was already feeling the changes. Enhanced vision and hearing. Occasional telepathic flashes. The entities weren't just planning to possess me. They were upgrading me first to serve as the perfect host. Dr. Walsh's tests confirmed the transformation was progressing rapidly. 4 to 5 days before it becomes irreversible, she warned. 4 days to find a solution that had stumped the federal government's best experts. I made a desperate decision. I want to go back to the original excavation site. Absolutely not, Agent Kim protested. If they want me as a vessel, they won't let me die before the transformation. I might be the only person who can get close enough to do real damage. Rodriguez insisted on coming with me. We're partners. Someone needs to watch your back. We planned what everyone acknowledged was a suicide mission. If we couldn't stop the entities, the federal task force had authorization to use nuclear weapons as a last resort. We set out across desert terrain that had become alien landscape. The sand was wrong colors, the sky had multiple suns, mountains moved like dancers. Guardian creatures, coyotes with geometric patterns, birds with too many wings, escorted us safely to the excavation site. The site had transformed into impossible structures rising hundreds of feet into the air, connected by bridges spanning empty space. At the center stood a crystalline palace made of black glass. I have to go alone, I told Rodriguez, as guardians prevented him from following me to the palace. Inside, the palace contained its own weather system. At the center, on a throne of crystallized time, sat an entity of geometric perfection and infinite complexity. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in my mind. "Welcome, vessel. You have arrived at the appointed time. I'm here to understand what you want and why you think you have the right to take it. Rights are constructs of civilization. We exercise authority that predates your species by millions of years. I learned they needed human vessels because consciousness required appropriate substrate to manifest in three-dimensional space. Their original forms were adapted to different conditions, but human bodies, properly modified, could house their intelligence." "So you're refugees," I said. "We are rightful inhabitants reclaiming stolen territory. Your species is the invasive presence. They offered transformation rather than genocide. Human consciousness preserved but redirected toward constructive purposes under alien management. To them, this was merciful. You demonstrated unusual resistance," the entity explained about choosing me. "The Stone King requires a vessel capable of independent thought and decisive action." I could feel the transformation progressing, my consciousness being compressed to make room for the incoming alien intelligence. The Stone King's presence was overwhelming, pressing against my identity like a tidal wave. But the process required my cooperation. Without voluntary acceptance, the possession would be unstable. I refused to step aside. "Then you will experience the transition as death," the entity warned. "Your consciousness will be consumed." As the Stone King tried to complete its manifestation, my resistance caused feedback loops in the entity's network. The palace began shaking, its architecture breaking down. Through my radio, Rodriguez reported that structures throughout the complex were destabilizing. "You are disrupting the harmonic resonance," the entity said with strain. "Cease your resistance, or the entire matrix will collapse." "Good," I managed to say. "Maybe that will give my species time to find a real solution." But my continued defiance was burning out my neural pathways. I was dying, but taking the Stone King with me. Then Agent Kim's voice came through the radio with words I never expected. "Thompson, Federal nuclear strike inbound. You have 90 seconds to reach minimum safe distance." I had 90 seconds, not enough time to escape. So I stopped resisting the possession and pulled the Stone King deeper into my failing consciousness, trapping it in a feedback loop that would destroy us both when the nuclear weapon arrived. "What are you doing?" the entity demanded. "Taking you with me. If one of your Stone Kings dies with me, it'll be decades before you can attempt this again. Maybe enough time for my species to fight back." The nuclear weapon struck 45 seconds later. I was already dead, my consciousness finally overwhelmed. But the Stone King died with me, its millions of years of experience lost in the same neural collapse. The explosion vaporized the entire complex and most of the entities. The survivors were forced underground, their network shattered, their plans reduced to radioactive dust. Rodriguez survived, though he spent months recovering from radiation exposure. The official story was a terrorist nuclear device. San Diego was rebuilt, though certain areas remained off-limits for decades. Agent Kim offered Rodriguez a position with the Supernatural Task Force. He accepted, partly because regular police work seemed trivial after fighting for human survival, and partly because he felt he owed it to my memory. The carved stones were never all found. More artifacts remained buried throughout Southern California, waiting for the next construction project to disturb their rest. "Thompson saved us," Rodriguez told new recruits during training. "But he also proved these threats can be defeated if someone's willing to pay the ultimate price. The entities aren't invincible, they're just very old and very smart. The federal task force established new protocols based on lessons from San Diego. Early warning systems, rapid response teams, recognition that some battles could only be won through sacrifice. Rodriguez served 15 years before retiring to Oregon, far from any known ancient sites. He still dreams about the impossible complex, watching his partner walk toward a confrontation that could only end one way, but he also dreams about the children who won't be born into a world ruled by alien intelligences, the families who will never know how close they came to losing their humanity. Because that's what police work really means, standing between innocent people and things that want to hurt them, no matter how ancient or powerful. Sometimes you arrest the threat, sometimes you negotiate, and sometimes all you can do is make sure it dies with you. Officer Rebecca Thompson died saving the world, and most people will never know her name. But that's okay. She didn't become a cop for fame. She became one to protect and serve, and she fulfilled that oath completely. The entities will try again someday. They're patient, intelligent, convinced of their right to rule Earth, but they'll face human defenders who understand the stakes, who learned from Thompson's sacrifice, who are willing to make the same choice if necessary. Because that's what it means to be human. Not the smartest species, not the strongest, but the one that chooses to fight for freedom even when odds are impossible. The one that produces police officers willing to die rather than let their communities be enslaved. Rodriguez kept Thompson's badge throughout his federal service. Sometimes he'd take it out and polish it, remembering the partner who taught him that some things are worth more than your own life. Protecting the innocent, serving something larger than yourself, standing guard against darkness, even when the darkness predates human civilization. These principles guide supernatural law enforcement, fought with the blood of officers who faced impossible odds and chose duty over survival. Thompson wasn't the first to make that choice, and won't be the last, but her sacrifice ensured humanity would have time to prepare for future threats. The entity's network was shattered, their confidence in human weakness proven wrong. Next time they try to reclaim Earth, they'll face a species that knows what's coming and has had decades to prepare. They'll face federal task forces trained in supernatural combat, early warning systems, weapons created to fight otherworldly intelligences. Most importantly, they'll face human beings who remember Officer Rebecca Thompson and the choice she made in that impossible palace. Police officers, federal agents, military personnel, and ordinary citizens who understand that freedom is worth fighting for. The badge means something. The oath means something. And sometimes that meaning requires the ultimate sacrifice. Rodriguez retired in 2035, but remained available as consultant and trainer. New recruits heard the story of San Diego, learned about carved stones and ancient entities, understood their work was about more than law enforcement. They were guardians of human autonomy, protectors of a species' right to determine its own future. They stood watch against threats most people couldn't imagine, armed with weapons that barely worked, facing enemies that had ruled worlds before humans learned to make fire. Dangerous work, difficult work, but also the most important work in the world. Because somewhere beneath rebuilt Southern California, in caves and tunnels deeper than human maps reach, ancient intelligences wait with infinite patience for their next opportunity. They remember the officer who destroyed their champion. They remember humans who refused to be managed like livestock, and they plan their revenge. But human defenders remember too. They remember Rebecca Thompson's courage, Rodriguez's loyalty, the lesson that no enemy is too powerful if you're willing to pay the right price. The war between humanity and ancient entities isn't over, may never be over. But humans proved they can win individual battles, and sometimes individual battles change history's course. Officer Thompson's badge sits in a place of honor at Federal Task Force headquarters, reminding everyone who sees it that some things are worth more than your own life. Freedom, dignity, the right to choose your destiny rather than accept management by beings who see you as inferior. These are things police officers swear to protect and serve. From ordinary criminals to supernatural entities, from human threats to alien invasions, the oath remains the same. Protect and serve. Even unto death, especially unto death, because that's what wearing the badge means, whether issued by local police or federal supernatural task force. You stand between innocent and guilty, weak and strong, human and inhuman. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very lucky, you get the chance to save the world. Officer Rebecca Thompson saved the world on a Tuesday afternoon in September, in a palace made of crystallized time beneath the California desert. She died doing it, but ensured billions would live free rather than as vessels for alien intelligences. Not bad for a cop from San Diego's Southern Division. The story ends there, but the legacy continues. Every officer graduating supernatural law enforcement training carries a bit of Thompson's courage. Every successful mission against otherworldly threats honors her sacrifice. Every human child born into a world still ruled by humans rather than ancient entities testifies to her choice. She was just a police officer doing her job, but sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Someone willing to do their job no matter the cost. Someone who understands the badge means more than personal safety. It means standing guard against darkness, whatever form that darkness takes. In San Diego, where desert wind still carries whispers of ancient languages, and construction crews occasionally find carved stones they shouldn't disturb, the darkness knows humans are watching. Humans who remember Officer Rebecca Thompson and the price she paid to keep them free. Humans who wear badges and carry guns and stand ready to make the same choice if necessary. Because that's what police officers do. They protect and serve, no matter what they're protecting against or who they're serving. Even if it costs them everything, especially if it costs them everything. The radio crackled to life at 2:14 a.m., cutting through the suffocating silence that had settled over Fresno County like a burial shroud. Officer David Anderson had been driving the empty highways of California's Central Valley for 3 hours, his patrol unit cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. The agricultural heartland stretched endlessly in all directions. Thousands of acres of farmland that fed half the nation, but at night became something else entirely. Unit 4, Charlie 7, respond to welfare check at Millbrook Ranch, Highway 1, 80 mile, marker 15. Family hasn't been seen in town for 2 weeks. Anderson keyed his radio, his voice the only human sound for miles. Copy dispatch, 4, Charlie 7 responding. Millbrook Ranch. He knew the place, or thought he did. The Hendricks family had been working that land for 3 generations. Good people who kept to themselves and paid their taxes on time. But 2 weeks was a long time for a farming family to go without appearing in town for supplies. The Central Valley at night was a different world from the California most people knew. No beaches, no Hollywood glamour, no tech companies. Just endless fields of crops stretching toward horizons you couldn't see. Irrigation canals that looked like black veins in the moonlight, and farmhouses scattered so far apart they might as well be on different planets. Anderson had been working this beat for 8 years, ever since transferring from Oakland PD after a shooting that left him questioning whether he wanted to keep dealing with urban violence. The valley had seemed like a peaceful alternative. Routine traffic stops, the occasional domestic dispute, maybe some kids drinking beer behind the grain silos. Simple police work for simple people. He'd been wrong about the simple part. The turnoff for Millbrook Ranch appeared in his headlights like a mouth opening in the darkness. A wooden sign, weathered and tilted, marked a dirt road that disappeared into what looked like absolute void. Anderson turned onto the gravel drive, his tires crunching loudly in the silence. The ranch house sat maybe half a mile from the main road, surrounded by fields that had been harvested weeks ago, and now lay bare under the starlight. As Anderson's headlights swept across the property, he could see the outline of barns, equipment sheds, and what looked like worker housing in the distance. Everything appeared normal, but something felt wrong in a way he couldn't immediately identify. He parked near the front porch and killed the engine, then sat for a moment listening to the night sounds, or rather, listening to the absence of night sounds. No insects chirping, no distant cattle lowing, no wind rustling through crops. Just silence so complete it made his ears ring. Anderson grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the patrol unit. The October air was cool but not cold, carrying the smell of recently turned earth and something else underneath it. Something organic and unpleasant, like fruit left too long in the sun. The farmhouse was a two-story structure that had probably been built in the 1940s, with a wraparound porch and painted shutters that looked black in the moonlight. No lights showed in any of the windows, but that wasn't unusual for 2:30 in the morning. What was unusual was the complete absence of any sign that people lived here. No vehicles in the driveway, no newspapers piled up on the porch, no clothes on the line or tools left out where they'd been used during the day. The place looked abandoned, but Anderson knew the Hendricks family had been here as recently as 2 weeks ago. He climbed the wooden steps to the front porch, noting that they didn't creak under his weight the way old wood should. His flashlight beam played across the front door, revealing that it was slightly ajar. Not wide open, just cracked enough to show darkness beyond. "Hello? Fresno County Sheriff's Department?" Anderson called out. "Mr. Hendricks? We're just checking to make sure everyone's okay." No response. The silence seemed to deepen, if that was possible. Anderson tried the doorbell, but heard no sound from inside the house. He knocked on the doorframe with his flashlight, the metallic wrapping echoing strangely in the still air. "Mr. Hendricks? Mrs. Hendricks. This is Deputy Anderson with the Sheriff's Department. Your neighbors were concerned because no one's seen you in town recently." Still nothing. Anderson pushed the door open wider and aimed his flashlight into the interior. The beam revealed a living room that looked like it had been frozen in time. Furniture covered with white sheets, family photos on the mantelpiece gathering dust, a grandfather clock that had stopped running, but no signs of struggle. No indication that anything violent had occurred. Just the feeling that the people who lived here had simply vanished one day, leaving everything exactly as it was. Anderson stepped across the threshold, his hand resting on his service weapon more from habit than any specific sense of danger. The floorboards were solid under his feet, no creaking or groaning despite the house's age. "Hello? Anyone home?" His voice seemed to be absorbed by the darkness rather than echoing through the rooms. Anderson moved deeper into the house, his flashlight beam revealing a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in weeks. Clean dishes in the drainer, a coffee pot that was cold to the touch, a calendar on the wall showing September with no entries marked for the past 2 weeks. The refrigerator hummed quietly, suggesting the power was still on. Anderson opened it and found food that should have spoiled weeks ago but looked fresh. Milk that should have curdled, vegetables that should have rotted, meat that should have developed a smell. Everything preserved as if time had stopped the moment the family disappeared. That's when Anderson noticed the photographs. They were scattered across the kitchen table, dozens of them, all showing the same scene from slightly different angles. The Hendricks family, Tom, Sarah, and their 2 teenage daughters, standing in what looked like one of their fields. But something was wrong with the images. The family members were all facing the camera, but their expressions were blank. Not smiling, not frowning, just empty. And behind them, in the background of every photo, was something that made Anderson's skin crawl. The field wasn't planted with crops. Instead, it was covered with what looked like mushrooms. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, growing in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The mushrooms were pale, almost luminescent, and they seemed to be moving in the photographs even though Anderson knew that was impossible. He picked up one of the photos for a closer look and immediately wished he hadn't. The longer he stared at it, the more details emerged that shouldn't have been there. Faces in the mushroom caps, eyes watching from the patterns in the field, and the family members themselves. When Anderson looked closely, he could see that their blank expressions weren't peaceful. They were terrified. But terrified of what? And who had taken these photographs? Anderson's radio crackled, making him jump. 4. Charlie 7, what's your status? He keyed the radio, surprised to find his hand was shaking slightly. Still on scene at Millbrook Ranch, the family doesn't appear to be home, but the house is unlocked and there are some unusual items inside. Copy that. Do you need backup? Anderson looked around the empty kitchen, at the impossible photographs scattered on the table, at the food that should have spoiled but hadn't. Not yet. I'm going to check the rest of the property, see if they might be staying in one of the outbuildings. Copy. Check in again in 30 minutes. Anderson clipped the radio back to his belt and gathered up several of the photographs. Evidence, he told himself, though evidence of what he couldn't say. As he moved toward the back door of the house, his flashlight beam caught something else that made him stop. Muddy footprints led from the kitchen door toward the back of the house. Not the kind of mud you'd expect from farmland, but something darker and more organic. The prints were roughly the size of human feet, but the pattern was wrong. Too many toe marks, and they seemed to branch and merge in ways that suggested whoever made them wasn't walking normally. Anderson followed the trail through the house, his flashlight revealing more photographs scattered along the path. These showed the mushroom field at different times of day, and in some of them Anderson could see figures moving among the pale growths. Human figures, but moving in that same wrong way suggested by the footprints. The trail led upstairs where Anderson found bedrooms that looked like they'd been hastily abandoned. Clothes scattered on the floor, dresser drawers pulled open, windows left wide despite the October chill, but still no sign of the family themselves. In the master bedroom, Anderson found something that made his blood run cold. The entire wall above the bed was covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all showing the same mushroom field from every conceivable angle. But these photos were different from the ones downstairs. These showed the field changing over time, the mushrooms growing larger and more numerous, the geometric patterns becoming more complex. And, in the most recent photos, the ones that appeared to have been taken just days ago, the mushroom field wasn't empty. It was full of people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing motionless among the pale growths. Men, women, children, all with the same blank expressions Anderson had seen on the Hendricks family faces. But the most disturbing thing was that Anderson recognized some of the people in the photos. Faces he'd seen around town. Families he knew lived in the area. People who should have been home in their beds, not standing in a mushroom field in the middle of the night. Anderson's radio crackled again. 4. Charlie 7, status report. Still on scene, Anderson replied, his voice steadier than he felt. I'm going to check the outbuildings now. He gathered several more photographs and headed back downstairs, following the muddy footprints toward the back door. The trail led across a muddy yard toward a large barn that loomed against the star-lit sky like a black monument. The barn doors were open, revealing darkness that seemed deeper than normal shadow. Anderson approached cautiously, his flashlight beam probing the interior. The smell he'd noticed earlier was stronger here, that organic, overripe scent that suggested decomposition and growth happening simultaneously. Inside the barn, Anderson found the source of the smell. The entire floor was covered with mushrooms, the same pale, luminescent variety he'd seen in the photographs. They grew in those same geometric patterns, forming pathways and clearings that looked almost like a maze. And throughout the maze, Anderson could see the footprints, dozens of sets of them, all leading deeper into the mushroom garden. At the center of the barn, in a clearing surrounded by the tallest mushrooms, Anderson found something that made him reach for his weapon. A chair, occupied by someone who might once have been Tom Hendricks. The man sat perfectly still, his eyes open but unfocused, his skin pale and waxy. Mushrooms grew from his clothes, his hair, even from his skin itself, integrating him into the larger organism that filled the barn. But he was still breathing. Slow, rhythmic breaths that seemed to match some unheard pulse emanating from the mushroom field. Anderson took a step closer and realized that Tom Hendricks wasn't alone. Other figures sat in chairs throughout the clearing, all in the same condition. Sarah Hendricks, their 2 daughters, and several other people Anderson recognized from town. All of them alive but transformed, integrated into whatever the mushrooms were creating. "Mr. Hendricks?" Anderson called out softly. "Can you hear me?" Tom's eyes moved slightly, focusing on Anderson with obvious effort. His mouth opened, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Officer Anderson," he whispered, "you shouldn't have come." "What happened here, Tom? What are these things?" "Found them in the back field after the harvest. Thought they were just mushrooms, but they're not." Tom's voice faded, then strengthened again. "They're connected. All of them. One organism, spreading." Anderson's skin crawled as he realized what Tom was describing. Not individual mushrooms, but a single massive organism using the farm as a base to spread across the Central Valley. And the people weren't victims. They were being incorporated, turned into nodes in a larger network. "How many farms?" Anderson asked. "How far has it spread?" "All of them," Tom whispered. "Every farm, within 20 miles, maybe more, the whole valley, soon." Anderson backed away from the clearing, his mind racing. If Tom was right, if this organism had already spread to dozens of farms across the Central Valley, then they were looking at something far beyond a local police matter. This was a biological contamination event, possibly an invasion by something that shouldn't exist on Earth. He needed to call for backup, get experts involved, figure out how to stop this before it spread further. But as Anderson turned to leave the barn, he found his path blocked by figures emerging from the mushroom maze. They looked human at first glance, but moved with the same wrong gait suggested by the footprints in the house. Men and women in farming clothes, all with that same blank expression, all covered with pale growths that seemed to pulse in unison. They surrounded Anderson slowly, deliberately, herding him back toward the center of the barn. "You can't leave now," one of them said in a voice that sounded like multiple people speaking in harmony. "You've seen too much. You understand what we're building here." Anderson drew his weapon, though he wasn't sure bullets would be effective against whatever these people had become. "Stay back. I'm a police officer and I'm ordering you to let me pass." "Orders don't matter anymore," the collective voice replied. "Individual authority is obsolete. We are building something better, something that connects all living things in perfect harmony. The mushrooms throughout the barn were glowing brighter now, and Anderson could feel something pressing against his mind. Not thoughts exactly, but sensations. Images of the Central Valley transformed into a vast network of interconnected organisms. Visions of humanity integrated into something larger and more efficient. The promise of perfect cooperation, perfect understanding, perfect peace. You could be part of it, the voice continued. Help us spread to the cities, to the coasts, to the rest of the world. No more violence, no more crime, no more need for police officers because there will be no more conflict. Anderson could feel the appeal of what they were offering. After 8 years of dealing with human stupidity and violence, the idea of perfect harmony was tempting. But he also understood what it would cost. Individual identity, free will, everything that made humans human. Thanks, but I'll pass, Anderson said, aiming his weapon at the nearest figure. I like humanity messy. He fired 3 shots center mass, expecting the figures to fall or at least react. Instead, they simply absorbed the bullets without apparent damage. The holes sealed themselves almost immediately, healing with unnatural speed. Violence is unnecessary, the voice said. You will join us eventually. Everyone will. It's already begun in the cities. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento. The spores travel on the wind, in food shipments, in the water supply. Soon there will be no one left to resist. Anderson's blood went cold. If they were telling the truth, if this organism had already reached California's major population centers, then the situation was far worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a local outbreak, it was a statewide catastrophe, possibly a global one. The figures were closing in now, moving with that same coordinated purpose that suggested they were all parts of a single mind. Anderson backed toward what he hoped was another exit, but the mushrooms seemed to shift and grow, blocking potential escape routes. That's when he remembered the photographs in his pocket. Every image had shown the mushroom field in daylight, suggesting that whatever this organism was, it was most active at night. Maybe sunlight would affect it, slow it down, give him a chance to escape and call for help. Anderson pulled out his flashlight and adjusted the beam to its brightest setting, then aimed it directly at the nearest figure. The effect was immediate. The person stumbled backward, the mushroom growths on their skin writhing as if in pain. The coordinated movement of the group faltered, individual members acting more like confused humans than parts of a hive mind. Light, Anderson muttered. You don't like light. He swept the beam across the advancing figures, driving them back toward the darker parts of the barn. The mushrooms themselves seemed to retreat from the illumination, their pale glow dimming wherever his flashlight touched them. Anderson fought his way toward the barn doors, using the flashlight like a weapon to clear a path through the increasingly agitated figures. Behind him, he could hear Tom Hendricks calling out in that wind-through-leaves voice. You can't stop it, officer. Too late. Already spread too far. Join us now, or join us later. No difference. Anderson reached the barn doors and ran toward his patrol unit, expecting pursuit but finding none. When he looked back, the figures had stopped at the edge of the barn, apparently unable or unwilling to follow him into the open air, where starlight provided minimal but constant illumination. He reached his patrol car and immediately grabbed the radio. Dispatch, this is 4 Charlie 7. I need immediate backup at Millbrook Ranch, and I need you to contact the CDC and the FBI. We have a biological contamination event that may have spread across multiple counties. Static answered him. Then a voice that sounded like the dispatcher but spoke with the same harmonious quality he'd heard in the barn. No backup is coming, Officer Anderson. The network extends further than you realize. Even we are part of it now. Anderson stared at the radio in horror, realizing that the contamination had already reached the dispatch center, possibly the entire sheriff's department. He was on his own, facing an enemy that could think collectively, coordinate across vast distances, and apparently convert people faster than any normal disease or infection. He started the patrol unit and drove away from the ranch as fast as the dirt road would allow, his mind racing through possibilities. If the organism could spread through spores and contaminated food, if it had already reached the major cities, then conventional containment was impossible. But maybe the light sensitivity he'd discovered could be exploited somehow. Anderson reached the main highway and turned toward Fresno, hoping to find someone in authority who hadn't been converted yet. But as he drove through the darkness, he began to notice things that made his hope fade. Houses with all their lights turned off despite the late hour. Vehicles parked in perfect formation along the roadside, and in the fields on both sides of the highway, that same pale glow that had filled the barn. The organism wasn't confined to Millbrook Ranch. It had spread throughout the agricultural heartland, turning the Central Valley into a vast network of interconnected growth. And if the voice on the radio was telling the truth, it had already reached the cities, probably using the food distribution network that connected the valley to the rest of California. Anderson's patrol unit was one of the few vehicles on the highway, and as he approached the outskirts of Fresno, he could see why. The city looked wrong from a distance, too dark, too quiet. Streetlights were functioning, but many houses and businesses were completely dark, and there were people in the streets, but they moved with that same coordinated purpose he'd seen at the ranch. He pulled into a gas station on the edge of town, hoping to find a landline phone that might not be compromised. The station was open, lights on, but when Anderson went inside, he found the clerk standing motionless behind the counter, staring straight ahead with blank eyes. "Evening, officer," the clerk said without looking at him. "Beautiful night, isn't it? Perfect weather for growing." Anderson didn't respond. He grabbed a payphone in the corner and dialed the FBI field office in Sacramento, hoping they hadn't been compromised yet. The phone rang several times before someone answered. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. How may I help you?" "This is Deputy Anderson with Fresno County Sheriff's Department," Anderson said quickly. "I need to report a biological contamination event that may affect multiple states. Some kind of fungal organism that can convert human beings into a collective intelligence." There was a pause. Then the voice on the phone spoke with that familiar harmonic quality. "We're aware of the situation, Deputy Anderson. There's no need for alarm. The transition is proceeding smoothly. Why don't you return to your patrol area and await further instructions?" Anderson hung up the phone, his worst fears confirmed. The organism had already reached Sacramento, which meant it probably controlled the state government, federal agencies, maybe even the military. He was dealing with something that could coordinate its spread across hundreds of miles, converting key personnel first to ensure no organized resistance. But that also suggested a weakness. If the organism relied on existing infrastructure to spread and maintain control, then disrupting that infrastructure might slow it down. And Anderson had noticed that individual nodes seemed vulnerable to light, suggesting that the collective intelligence was less effective when its components were isolated. He left the gas station and drove toward the center of Fresno, looking for signs of normal human activity. Most of the city appeared to be under the organism's control, but Anderson spotted a few houses and businesses that still had lights on, people moving around normally inside. Anderson pulled up to one of the houses and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman answered, looking tired but alert. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Anderson with the Sheriff's Department. I need to ask you some questions about unusual activity in your neighborhood." The woman looked relieved to see him. Thank God someone's finally responding to our calls. We've been trying to reach the police for hours, but all we get is busy signals or people who don't make sense. What kind of unusual activity? Our neighbors, the woman said, glancing nervously at the houses on either side of her own. They were normal yesterday, but today they just stand in their yards staring at nothing. And there are these weird plants growing in their gardens, stuff that wasn't there a week ago. Anderson felt a surge of hope. If there were still uninfected people in Fresno, then the organism's spread wasn't complete. Maybe there was still time to organize some kind of resistance. Ma'am, I need you to gather your family and any neighbors you trust, people who are still acting normally. We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out how to handle this situation. Handle what situation? What's happening? Anderson looked at the woman's frightened face and made a decision. The truth was going to sound insane, but she deserved to know what they were dealing with. There's some kind of organism spreading through the Central Valley, probably the whole state. It looks like mushrooms or fungi, but it can take control of people's minds, turn them into parts of a collective intelligence. It's already compromised most of the government agencies, so we're on our own until help arrives from outside California. The woman stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. That actually explains a lot. My husband works for the county health department, and he came home yesterday talking about new food safety protocols that didn't make any sense. Then this morning he just left for work without saying anything, and he hasn't been answering his phone. Is there anywhere you can go outside the immediate area? Family in another state, maybe? My sister lives in Nevada, but how do we know this thing hasn't spread there too? Anderson thought about that. The organism seemed to be using California's agricultural infrastructure to spread, which meant it would probably move east along transportation routes. But Nevada was mostly desert, with very different growing conditions. Maybe the organism couldn't establish itself there, at least not easily. It's worth trying, Anderson said. But first, we need to warn as many people as possible. Do you have any kind of emergency communication system? Ham radio, CB, anything that doesn't go through normal channels? My neighbor, 3 houses down, has a ham radio setup. He's one of those survivalist types, always talking about government conspiracies. Turns out he might have been onto something. Anderson and the woman, she introduced herself as Linda Morrison, walked down the street to the house she'd indicated. The yard was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, and bright floodlights illuminated every approach. Someone inside had definitely noticed the change in their neighbor's behavior. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a bearded man in his 60s holding a shotgun. About time someone official showed up, he said, recognizing Anderson's uniform. I've been watching this neighborhood turn into something out of a horror movie. Half my neighbors are acting like zombies, and there's some kind of weird fungus growing in every yard except mine. Why not yours? Anderson asked. UV sterilization lamps, the man said proudly. Installed them last year to kill bacteria in my garden. Apparently they work on whatever this crap is, too. That confirmed Anderson's theory about light sensitivity. The organism could be damaged or deterred by artificial illumination, which explained why some houses were still free of contamination. I need to use your radio, Anderson said. We have to warn people outside California what's happening here. The man, he introduced himself as Frank Weber, led them to a basement filled with radio equipment, emergency supplies, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. He powered up his ham radio setup and handed Anderson the microphone. This goes out to anyone monitoring emergency frequencies, Anderson said. This is Deputy David Anderson with Fresno County Sheriff's Department in California. We have a biological contamination event in progress that has compromised local and state government agencies. The contamination appears to be a fungal organism that can control human behavior and is spreading through the agricultural food distribution network. Do not consume any food products originating from California, and establish quarantine procedures for anyone arriving from affected areas. Repeat, California is under biological attack by an unknown organism. Avoid all contact with California food shipments and evacuate civilians if possible. Anderson repeated the message several times, then handed the microphone back to Frank. Can you keep broadcasting that warning? We need to make sure someone outside California knows what's happening here. Already on it, Frank said, settling into his radio operator's chair. I've got contacts all over the country. Word will spread. Anderson turned to Linda. Gather your family and anyone else you trust who's still acting normally. Meet back here in 1 hour. We're going to try to get out of California before this thing spreads any further. But even as he said it, Anderson wondered if they were already too late. The organism had shown the ability to coordinate across vast distances, and it had apparently been spreading for weeks before anyone noticed. By now, contaminated food shipments could have reached every state in the country. Still, they had to try. And maybe, if they could document what they'd learned about the organism's light sensitivity, they could help others fight back against what might be humanity's last challenge. Anderson spent the next hour driving through Fresno, warning anyone who would listen and documenting the extent of the contamination. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The organism's control wasn't complete. Maybe 20% of the population was still unaffected. But those who had been converted were working with disturbing efficiency to spread the contamination further. He watched converted humans systematically removing streetlights, sabotaging UV sterilization equipment, and cultivating mushroom gardens in areas that had previously been clear. They weren't acting like mindless zombies, but like components of a vast intelligence with a clear plan for total conversion. When Anderson returned to Frank's house, he found a group of 15 people waiting in the reinforced basement. Families, individuals, even a few local business owners who had noticed their employees acting strangely. All of them scared. All of them looking to Anderson for answers he didn't have. All right, Anderson said, looking at the assembled group. Here's what we know. There's some kind of fungal organism that can take control of human beings and turn them into parts of a collective intelligence. It's sensitive to bright light, especially UV radiation. It's already compromised most government agencies in California, and it's probably spreading to other states through the food distribution network. So, what do we do? Linda asked. We get out of California, Anderson replied. We warn everyone we can along the way, and we hope that someone, somewhere, is in a position to organize a real resistance before this thing spreads globally. Frank looked up from his radio setup. I've been monitoring government frequencies, he said grimly. Whatever this is, it's not limited to California anymore. I'm picking up similar reports from Oregon, Nevada, Arizona. This thing is spreading faster than we thought possible. Anderson felt his hope deflate. If the organism had already reached neighboring states, then their escape plan might be futile. But they still had to try, if only to document what they'd learned for whoever came after them. Does anyone have vehicles that can carry this many people? Anderson asked. I've got a converted school bus, Frank said. Use it for bug-out scenarios. Armored solar panels, enough supplies for a few weeks. Perfect. We leave in 30 minutes. Bring only essential supplies and anything that generates UV light. We'll head east toward states that don't depend on California agriculture. Try to find somewhere this thing hasn't reached yet. As the group prepared for departure, Anderson couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a battle that was already lost. The organism showed every sign of being an invasive species from somewhere else, possibly another planet. It had adapted quickly to Earth conditions, found ways to exploit human society's weaknesses, and spread with a speed that suggested it had done this before. But humanity had survived worse challenges: ice ages, volcanic eruptions, global pandemics. Maybe this would just be another test of the species' adaptability and resilience. Or maybe this was how humanity ended, not with war or natural disaster, but with conversion into something else. Something that might be better adapted for survival but was no longer recognizably human. Anderson looked out at the darkened streets of Fresno, at the pale glow emanating from contaminated houses, at the perfect stillness that suggested thousands of people all thinking the same thoughts. Whatever happened next, the California he'd known was already gone, replaced by something alien and strange. The only question now was whether the rest of the world would follow, or whether humanity still had enough fight left to resist the change that was coming for them all. Frank's bus rumbled to life in the driveway, its armored sides reflecting the UV lamps that Frank had installed around his property. 15 frightened people climbed aboard, carrying everything they valued that would fit in a single bag. Anderson took one last look at the neighborhood where he'd tried to serve and protect, then climbed into the bus. Behind them, Fresno glowed with unnatural light as the organism continued its work of transformation. Ahead lay uncertainty, possibly hope. Maybe just a longer road to the same inevitable destination. But they were still human, still free to choose their own path. And that was worth fighting for as long as possible. The bus pulled away from Frank's house and headed for the highway, carrying the last free citizens of Fresno toward an uncertain future, in a world that was changing faster than anyone could comprehend.